Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still get chills thinking about what happened 8 years ago. It was late September 2015, and I was visiting my brother Ryan at his ranch, about 20 kilometers north of Quesnel, British Columbia. Mom and I had driven up from Kelowna for the week to help him settle in. He'd only moved there about 3 months earlier and was still getting used to rural life after living in Vancouver for so long. Ryan's property was pretty isolated, about 5 acres of land with a small ranch house, a barn, and a couple of outbuildings. The nearest neighbor was probably a kilometer away. The surrounding area was this beautiful mix of dense forest, lots of pine, spruce, and some deciduous trees whose leaves were just starting to turn golden and red. That particular day, Mom, Catherine, and I had driven into Quesnel to pick up some supplies. Ryan needed a specific type of hinge for a gate he was repairing. Plus, we grabbed some groceries since his fridge was practically empty. Typical bachelor living, even at 36. We spent longer in town than we'd planned. Mom ran into an old friend from her teaching days who'd relocated to Quesnel years ago, so we ended up having coffee and catching up. By the time we headed back, the sun was already low in the sky. It was that weird twilight hour where everything gets this bluish-grey tint and shadows start playing tricks on your eyes. The road to Ryan's place was this winding 2-lane highway that cut through dense forest for miles. No streetlights, barely any houses, just trees pressing in from both sides and the occasional driveway disappearing into the woods. Mom was driving her old Honda Civic. I remember we were talking about Ryan's dating life, or lack thereof, and laughing about how we should set him up with someone local. The radio was playing softly in the background, some classic rock station that kept cutting out as we drove through patches with poor reception. We were about 5 or 6 kilometers from Ryan's turnoff when Mom suddenly slowed down. "Watch for moose," she said, nodding toward the road ahead. "Something's moving by the tree line." I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The headlights caught something large near the edge of the road about 50 meters ahead. My first thought was definitely moose. They're common in the area, and Ryan had already warned us to be careful driving at dusk. As we got closer, though, I felt this weird sensation in my stomach. Something wasn't right about the shape. It was tall, for sure, but not quite the right silhouette for a moose. "Slow down more," I said, my eyes locked on whatever was standing there. Mom eased off the gas, and we crawled forward at maybe 20 kilometers per hour. That's when it stepped onto the road. I'll never forget what happened next. This thing walked from one side of the highway to the other in just 4 steps, 4 massive strides. The road was standard width, probably about 8 meters across, which means each step had to be close to 2 meters long. But it wasn't just the stride length that froze my blood. It was walking upright, on 2 legs. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered. I wasn't even aware I'd spoken until Mom responded. "I don't know," she said, her voice unnaturally tight. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The creature, and I struggled to find a better word for it, had to be at least 11 feet tall, maybe taller. I'm 5'8", and this thing would have towered over me. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. The arms seemed too long, hanging down almost to where knees would be. Its movements were fluid but purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going and wasn't concerned about us at all. The entire sighting lasted maybe 6 seconds from when it stepped onto the road until it disappeared into the trees on the other side. Mom and I sat in stunned silence for a moment before she slowly accelerated again. "Did you see that?" she finally asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Yeah," I managed. "That wasn't a moose." "It wasn't a bear either," she added, though neither of us had even considered that possibility. Whatever we saw was definitely bipedal. We'd driven another 50 meters when I spotted something through the trees. "Mom, slow down. Look over there." I pointed to the right side of the road. She slowed to a crawl, and we both peered into the forest. There, maybe 15 meters from the road, crouched under a large evergreen, was a dark shape. Even in the diminishing light, I could make out its massive outline. It was hunched down, almost as if trying to hide, but still visible due to its sheer size. "Stop the car," I whispered, though I immediately regretted saying it. Mum eased to a complete stop, right across from where the creature was hiding. I don't know what I was thinking. Some part of me needed confirmation that I wasn't hallucinating, I guess. We both stared into the forest, barely breathing. The light was fading fast, but I could make out enough details to know this wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. It was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. The head seemed oddly shaped, somewhat pointed at the top and proportionally small for the body size. I couldn't see facial features from that distance in the dim light, but I could feel it watching us. That's the only way I can describe it. This overwhelming sensation of being observed, studied, assessed. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I've never felt such a primal fear response before or since. "Start the car," I said quietly. "Let's go." Mom turned the key, but instead of the engine starting, there was just a clicking sound. She tried again. Nothing but clicking. "It won't start," she said, her voice barely audible. I could hear the panic rising in her throat. "Try again," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. She turned the key a third time. The car made the same clicking noise and then fell silent. "The battery was fine earlier," she said, her eyes darting between the dashboard and the forest where the creature was hiding. "It's only 3 months old." I couldn't take my eyes off the shape in the trees. Had it moved closer? I couldn't tell for sure, but it seemed like it was straightening up slightly. My mouth went completely dry. "Try one more time," I said, reaching over to squeeze her arm. "Then we'll call Ryan." Mom nodded and turned the key again. This time, mercifully, the engine sputtered to life. Without hesitation, she put the car in drive and pressed the gas pedal harder than necessary. The tires spun slightly on the asphalt before catching, and we lurched forward. Neither of us spoke for at least a minute as she drove well over the speed limit down the dark highway. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears. I kept checking the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature following us, though I knew that was irrational. Whatever it was couldn't possibly keep pace with a car. "What was that thing?" Mom finally asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I've ever seen." We reached Ryan's turnoff and followed the gravel driveway to his house. The lights were on inside, and his truck was parked out front. I remember feeling an immense sense of relief at these signs of normality. When we got inside, Ryan was in the kitchen making dinner. He looked up, surprised at our expressions. "What happened to you two? You look like you've seen a ghost." We told him everything. The creature crossing the road, its impossible height, the way it moved, how we saw it hiding in the trees, and even how the car temporarily died. I expected him to be concerned, maybe even grab his rifle and offer to drive back to the spot with us. Instead, he laughed. "You probably saw a moose, and the weird light made it look like something else," he said, turning back to the stove. "Or maybe a bear standing up. They can look pretty human when they're on their hind legs." "Ryan, this wasn't a bear or a moose," I insisted. "It was walking upright across the entire road. In 4 steps. It had to be at least 11 feet tall." He shrugged. "The mind plays tricks in low light. Remember when we were kids and you thought you saw a sea monster at Okanagan Lake? Turned out to be a floating log." I was furious. "I was 8 then. I'm 32 now, and Mom saw it too." Mom nodded. "It wasn't anything I've ever seen before, Ryan, and we were less than 5 kilometers from your property." Ryan's expression softened slightly. Look, I've been here for 3 months, and I've seen plenty of wildlife, bears, moose, cougars, even a wolverine once. But nothing like what you're describing. Don't you think if there were 11-foot-tall creatures walking around, someone would have documented them by now? That ended the discussion. He clearly wasn't going to believe us, and pushing the issue just made us sound crazy. We ate dinner in awkward silence, and the subject didn't come up again that night. The next morning, I convinced Mom to drive back to the spot with me in daylight. It was about 500 meters from Ryan's property line, much closer than I'd realized the night before. We found where the creature had crossed the road, but there was nothing to see. No footprints on the asphalt, of course. The ground on either side was covered in pine needles and fallen leaves, so we couldn't find tracks there either. We spent the rest of the visit pretending nothing had happened, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the sounds of the forest around Ryan's house, wondering if that thing was out there watching. The sensation of being observed stayed with me until we left 5 days later. After we returned to Kelowna, I spent weeks researching cryptid sightings in British Columbia. I found dozens of accounts from the area, around Quesnel, Carameos, and other remote communities. Stories about tall, hair-covered creatures walking on 2 legs. Most people called them Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but those terms seemed too commercialized for what we saw. This wasn't some guy in a costume. This was something ancient and intelligent that belonged in those woods. I moved to the Okanagan region permanently after that trip, and occasionally I hear similar stories from locals, hunters, hikers, and others who spend time in the remote wilderness. Most keep their experiences quiet because they don't want to be ridiculed, just like we were. I understand now why these creatures, whatever they are, remain so elusive despite their size. They know the forest better than we ever could. They know how to hide, when to move, and which humans pose a threat. And they have the advantage of disbelief. Even when someone sees them clearly, like we did, most people simply won't believe it. Ryan still lives on that property outside Quesnel. He's never reported seeing anything unusual, but sometimes when we talk on the phone, I can tell he's not as skeptical as he once was. Something changed. He never talks about it directly, but he doesn't laugh at my experience anymore either. I know what I saw that evening. I know it was real, and I know it's still out there. Story 2. I never planned on telling anyone about this. I'm not the type to broadcast my life online, but after recent events, I need to share this somewhere, even if it's anonymous. It happened last October. I was driving home from my buddy's place in Dodgeville, taking County Road Z like I always do. It was around 9:30 at night, and the rain was coming down pretty steady. Not a full-on downpour, but enough that I had my wipers going at a good clip. The road out there is basically a narrow strip of asphalt, cutting through farmland and patches of woods. No streetlights, just pure darkness once you're away from town. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station fading in and out with the hills, and was just focused on getting home. I was tired after a long day of helping my friend fix his deck, and all I wanted was a hot shower and my bed. The rain made everything worse, limiting visibility to maybe 30 feet ahead of my headlights. About halfway through my 40-minute drive, I came around this bend where the road straightens out for a good stretch. My headlights swept across something at the edge of the road that made me immediately ease off the gas. At first glance, I thought it was someone walking along the shoulder, maybe a broken-down car somewhere ahead. Out here, you stop to help people because cell service is spotty at best. But as I got closer, something felt off. The figure wasn't moving like a person would. It was just standing there, partially turned toward the road. I initially thought they were wearing some kind of brown coat or something, which made sense given the weather. Then I got close enough for my headlights to fully illuminate whatever it was, and I felt my entire body go cold. This thing was massive. I'm 6'1", and this had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. And it wasn't wearing clothes. What I thought was a brown coat was actually hair or fur, dark and reddish-brown, completely soaked from the rain and clinging to its body. The proportions were all wrong too. Its arms hung down way too low, almost to its knees, and its shoulders were impossibly wide, like linebacker wide, but even more exaggerated. I only saw it clearly for maybe 5 seconds as I drove past. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. Some primal part of my brain took over and told me to just keep driving. I didn't even look in my rearview mirror until I was a good half-mile down the road. By then, there was nothing to see but darkness and rain. The whole drive home, I kept telling myself I was tired. It was dark. The rain was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just a really tall guy wearing something weird. Maybe it was a hunter in some kind of ghillie suit. Though why anyone would be standing in the rain at night on the side of a county road made no sense. When I got home, I didn't tell my girlfriend. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I think I saw Bigfoot on County Road Z. Yeah, that would go over great. People already think I'm the practical joker in my friend group. No one would believe me, so I buried it, convinced myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, my tired eyes, whatever. But I started taking the longer route home from Dodgeville, the one that sticks to the main highways. I told myself it was because the pavement was better, less likely to have flooding in heavy rain. But I knew the real reason. Fast forward to last month. I was helping my dad clean out his garage, one of those projects that's been 2 weeks away for about 5 years. We were sorting through old fishing gear when he started reminiscing about his favorite fishing spot on the Pecatonica River, this secluded bend where he used to catch walleye like nobody's business. Haven't been back there in years, though, he said, organizing lures in his tackle box. Not since that weird day. Something in his tone made me look up. What weird day? He hesitated, hands pausing over the fishing gear. Ah, it's nothing. You'll think your old man's gone senile. Try me, I said. He sighed, closed the tackle box, and leaned against the workbench. It was maybe 10 years ago, early morning in May, just after sunrise. I was at my spot on the river, hadn't seen another soul all morning. The fishing was good. I already had 3 nice walleye on my stringer. I could see him debating whether to continue, so I just waited. Then I heard this cracking sound from the tree line, like branches breaking, but not random, more like something big moving deliberately. He pointed to the wall of his garage. The trees were maybe 50 yards away, up this gentle slope from the riverbank. I figured it was a deer, maybe even a black bear, though they're pretty uncommon around here. My heart was already starting to pound harder. But what came out wasn't a deer or a bear. Dad was staring at nothing now, seeing it all again in his mind. This thing stepped out from between the trees, massive, stood on 2 legs, but it wasn't a person, no way, covered in this dark reddish fur, just stood there at the edge of the trees, looking in my direction. My mouth went dry. What did you do? Nothing. I was frozen. It didn't move toward me, just stood there watching. Must have been 5 minutes we stayed like that, though it felt like hours. Then it just turned and walked back into the woods. Didn't rush, didn't make any threatening moves. Just left. Did you tell anyone? I asked, my voice barely audible. He shook his head. Who would believe me? Your mom would have said I had too much coffee. The guys at work would have never let me hear the end of it. I swallowed hard. Dad, I saw something too, last October, on County Road Z. His eyes locked onto mine, suddenly intense. What did you see, Daniel? I told him everything. The rain, the figure by the roadside, the impossible height and proportions, the reddish-brown hair. With each detail, I watched his face grow more serious. Same thing, he said when I finished. Has to be. Your spot on Zed isn't more than 5 miles from where I was fishing that day. We sat in silence for a long minute, the implications hanging between us. Finally, Dad spoke again. You know, your sister lives out that way now. by the old Henderson place. I nodded. My sister Beth had moved to a farmhouse rental about 2 years ago after her divorce. It was off a gravel road that branched from County Z. Maybe we should ask her if she's noticed anything unusual, I suggested. Dad nodded slowly. Might be a good idea. We finished the garage, in silence, both lost in our thoughts. That evening I called Beth and asked if I could stop by the next day. I didn't mention why. When I got to her place the following afternoon, she was in the middle of hanging Halloween decorations. Plastic skeletons and fake cobwebs on her front porch. Her 5-year-old daughter was helping by tangling herself in the fake spider webs. After the usual small talk and catching up, I waited until my niece was distracted with her toys in the living room before bringing up the real reason for my visit. Beth, have you ever seen anything strange out here, around your property or on the roads nearby? She gave me a look. Strange how? Like meth heads stealing farm equipment strange, or like something in the woods, something that shouldn't exist. The plastic pumpkin she was holding froze mid-air. She set it down carefully on her kitchen table. Why are you asking me this, Daniel? The intensity in her voice caught me off guard. I saw something on County Z last fall. Dad saw something similar years ago by the river. I just wondered if maybe living out here you might have... Last summer, she cut me off, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I was hanging laundry on the line out back. It was getting dark, but I wanted to finish before going in. Emma was already inside watching cartoons. She glanced toward the living room, making sure my niece couldn't hear. The field behind the house had just been cut for hay, so you could see all the way to the tree line, maybe 300 yards back. I noticed something at the edge of the woods. At first, I thought it was one of the neighbors' hunting blinds. They set them up early sometimes. But then it moved. I felt that same cold sensation I'd experienced in my car that night. It was tall, Daniel. So tall. Standing upright on 2 legs, but it wasn't a person. Too big. Too wrong. It just stood there at the edge of the field, watching the house. Watching me. What did you do? I asked, echoing the same question I'd asked Dad. I grabbed my laundry basket and ran inside, locked every door and window, kept the lights off in the back of the house all night, told myself it was just a bear standing funny, or my eyes playing tricks in the dusk. She paused. But I knew it wasn't. I've never told anyone. Who would believe me? Dad and I would, I said quietly. We've seen it too. Beth's eyes widened. Both of you? Separately? I nodded. Different times, different places, but all within a few miles of each other. Dad saw it by the Pecatonica about 10 years ago. I saw it on County Z last October. Oh my God, she whispered. So I'm not crazy. It's real. It's real, I confirmed, whatever it is. We spent the next hour comparing details, the height, the build, the reddish-brown hair. Every description matched. 3 separate encounters, years apart, by 3 different people who'd never discussed it until now. What do we do with this information? Beth finally asked. I shrugged. What can we do? Report a Bigfoot sighting to the sheriff? They'd laugh us out of the county. But if it's real, and clearly it is, there must be others who've seen it too, she argued. Probably, but like us, they're keeping quiet to avoid looking crazy. Beth glanced toward the window, her eyes scanning the tree line visible in the distance. I've been living with this fear for months, Daniel. Every time Emma wants to play in the backyard, I watch her like a hawk. Every noise at night makes me wonder if it's out there, getting closer to the house. I hadn't considered that angle. My encounter had been brief, from the safety of my car. Beth was living right in what was apparently this thing's territory. Has Emma ever mentioned seeing anything? I asked carefully. Beth shook her head firmly. No, thank God. And I don't want her to know about any of this. She already has enough trouble sleeping sometimes. Of course, I agreed. But maybe you... Should consider moving when your lease is up? She sighed. I've thought about it, but rentals I can afford are scarce, and Emma loves her school. I didn't push it. Instead, I asked, I could take the couch. She gave me a grateful smile. I appreciate that, but no. Knowing I'm not crazy, that you and Dad have seen it too, that actually helps more than you know. I left Beth's place as the sun was setting, with promises to check in regularly and to let her know if Dad or I learned anything more. As I drove home, taking the long route again, I kept scanning the roadside and the tree lines. Not out of fear exactly, but a strange kind of anticipation. Whatever we've been seeing in Iowa County isn't supposed to exist, but it does. 3 separate witnesses in my own family confirm it. I wonder how many others have seen it over the years. How many others are keeping their own encounters secret, afraid of ridicule or disbelief. I don't know what to call this thing. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some unknown species of primate. All I know is that it's out there, moving through the forests and fields of rural Wisconsin, occasionally allowing itself to be seen before disappearing back into the wilderness. I still drive to Dodgeville regularly. I still take the long way home. But sometimes, especially when I'm alone on those back roads at dusk, I find myself slowing down, eyes searching the tree lines and the ditches along the roadside, half hoping, half dreading another glimpse of that impossible figure standing in the rain. Story 3. I've been a wildlife enthusiast my whole life. Growing up in rural Virginia gave me plenty of opportunities to explore nature, track animals, and observe wildlife in their natural habitats. By 1992, I'd spent nearly 15 years hiking through the Appalachian wilderness, had seen just about every animal native to the region, and considered myself pretty experienced in the outdoors. Nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered that October day in Bath County. I remember it was unusually warm for mid-October. The leaves had started changing, painting the mountains with brilliant oranges and reds. I'd taken a few days off work to do some solo hiking near Warm Springs. The area was familiar to me. I'd been there dozens of times before and knew the trails well. That morning, I parked my old Jeep Cherokee at a small pull-off area near an unmarked trail I'd discovered years earlier. It wasn't on any official maps, just a narrow path that wound deeper into the forest than most casual hikers ventured. I packed light, just water, some trail mix, a compass, and my camera. I always brought my camera, hoping to capture photos of deer, black bears, or some of the more elusive forest creatures. The first few hours were peaceful. The forest was alive with the usual sounds: birds calling, leaves rustling, the occasional scurrying of small animals through the underbrush. I spotted a family of wild turkeys and followed a set of deer tracks for about half a mile before they disappeared into a creek bed. Around noon, I stopped to eat my lunch on a fallen log. The forest felt different somehow, quieter than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. Animals go silent for all sorts of reasons. A hawk overhead, the scent of a predator. But this silence felt heavier, more complete. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the soft sound of the breeze through the trees. I decided to push a little farther into the woods, following a game trail that branched off from my usual path. The trail led uphill, through a particularly dense section of forest where the canopy blocked most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight even in the middle of the day. That's when I first noticed something unusual through the trees ahead of me, maybe 50 yards away. My first thought was bear. The shape was large, dark, and seemed to be standing upright against a massive oak tree. Black bears occasionally stand on their hind legs, so I wasn't immediately alarmed, just cautious. I slowly reached for my camera, thinking I might get a great shot if I was careful not to spook it. But as I focused my attention on the figure, I realized something wasn't right. It was too tall for a bear, easily 7 feet, maybe more, and its proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were broad and hunched forward, but the shape was unmistakably humanoid. I froze mid-step, my hand still halfway to my camera bag. A cold sensation washed over me despite the warm day. The figure hadn't moved at all since I first spotted it. It was perfectly still, like a statue carved from the forest itself. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a strangely shaped tree, or my eyes were playing tricks in the dim light. I took a single step to the side, hoping a different angle might clarify things. That's when it turned its head, just its head, to face me directly. My blood ran cold. Those eyes, even from that distance I could see them clearly. They were deep set in a face that was mostly hairless, and they glowed with a reddish amber light, like dying embers in a fire pit. Not reflecting light like an animal's eyes at night. These were generating their own eerie glow even in daylight. I stood completely still, hardly daring to breathe. The creature and I locked eyes, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that I was looking at something intelligent, something that was assessing me just as I was trying to comprehend it. From my new angle, I could see more details that sent waves of fear through my body. What I had mistaken for dark fur was actually grey, a dirty, matted grey that reminded me of an old wolf I'd once seen in a wildlife sanctuary. The hair was patchy on its back and lower body, revealing leathery skin underneath that looked ancient, like old tree bark. Its face was the most disturbing part. While the top of its head and sides had that same grey, matted hair, the face itself was mostly bare. It had a nose that seemed flaccid, almost drooping, and a jaw that protruded forward slightly, giving it a primitive, almost prehistoric appearance. The mouth was set in what looked like a permanent grimace, revealing just the edges of yellowed teeth. The longer we stared at each other, the more details I noticed. The creature's muscular definition was visible even through the patchy hair, especially around its massive shoulders and chest. It was built like an Olympic wrestler who had aged and weathered, but still maintained that underlying power. I realized with growing horror that what I was looking at matched descriptions I'd heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but this wasn't the robust, powerful creature from campfire stories. This looked old, ancient, like it had been walking these forests for centuries. My mind raced through possible explanations. A man in a costume. Impossible. No costume could capture the subtle movements of muscles under skin, the weathered texture of its face. A bear with mange or some other condition. No bear stands that still or has that body structure, some undiscovered species. That seemed the only semi-rational explanation, but even that couldn't account for the intelligence I sensed behind those glowing eyes. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. It felt like hours. Neither of us moved. I was afraid to move, afraid that any sudden action might provoke the creature. It simply watched me, its eyes never blinking, its body never shifting, except for the almost imperceptible rise and fall of its chest as it breathed. The stalemate continued until my legs began to cramp from standing so rigidly. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I had to do something. Run? No, you never run from predators. It triggers their chase instinct. Call for help? There was no one around for miles. I decided my only option was to back away slowly, never turning my back on the creature. I took one small step backward. The creature's eyes followed me, but it made no move to approach. Another step back. Still no reaction. I continued this way for what felt like an eternity, one small step after another, keeping my eyes locked with those glowing red orbs. After I'd put about 20 yards between us, the creature did something that still haunts my nightmares. It raised one hand, a massive, gnarled hand with long fingers that looked more like talons, and placed it against the tree trunk beside it. The gesture wasn't threatening exactly, but it communicated something unmistakable. This was its territory, and I was the intruder. Once I'd backed up maybe 40 yards, I noticed the creature's attention shift slightly. Its eyes darted to something in the forest to my right, then back to me. I didn't dare look away to see what had caught its attention. but that momentary distraction gave me an opportunity. I took 2 quick steps backward, putting a large tree between us. Then I turned and started walking away as quickly as I could without running, my heart hammering in my chest. Every few steps, I glanced back over my shoulder, expecting to see the creature pursuing me. But each time I looked, it was still in the same position, watching me retreat. Only when I could no longer see it through the trees did I finally give in to the panic that had been building inside me. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, crashing through underbrush, jumping over fallen logs, branches slapping at my face and arms. I didn't care about the noise I was making or the scratches accumulating on my skin. I just needed to get away. I followed the game trail back to the main path, then raced along it toward where I'd parked my Jeep. The entire time, I felt like something was right behind me, just out of sight. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to hide those glowing red eyes. When I finally burst out of the tree line and saw my vehicle sitting there, I nearly collapsed with relief. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The moment the engine roared to life, I threw the Jeep into reverse, spun around on the narrow road, and sped away from that forest as fast as the winding mountain roads would allow. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without seeing those eyes in my dreams. I told a few close friends about the encounter, but their reactions ranged from amused disbelief to concerned suggestions that maybe I'd been working too hard and needed a vacation. No one took it seriously. Eventually, I stopped talking about it, but I never stopped thinking about it. I spent countless hours researching, trying to find any reports of similar sightings in the area. There were a few vague stories from locals about strange noises in the woods or livestock acting disturbed for no apparent reason, but nothing that matched what I'd seen. I've thought about going back many times over the years, maybe with other people for safety. But something always stops me. It's not just fear, though there's plenty of that. It's the certainty that whatever I saw that day was something ancient and powerful, something that has existed in those mountains long before humans settled there, and will likely remain long after we're gone. That creature wasn't just a random animal that happened to cross my path. It was waiting there, watching. I'm convinced it knew the trails humans used and deliberately positioned itself where it could observe without being easily detected. The way it stood so perfectly still, the intelligence in those eyes. This wasn't a chance encounter. It wanted to be seen, by me, specifically. Why? I still don't know. But I can't shake the feeling that it was sending a message. This is my forest. I am watching. I have always been watching. To this day, I haven't returned to that section of Bath County forest. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen. Some memories don't fade. And sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what might happen if you go back. It's knowing that something ancient and unknowable is still out there, waiting. Story 4. I've gone back and forth about whether to post this, but I need to get it off my chest. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, and my husband says I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, listening for something. This happened last summer when my family and I rented a cottage at Lake Spectacle in Ontario's Madawaska Valley. My husband Mark, our 2 kids, Aidan 14 and Emma 11, and I were all excited for a week away from the city. We're from Toronto and needed to escape the concrete jungle for a bit. I'd been working overtime at the hospital, I'm a nurse, and Mark's software company had him pulling 60-hour weeks. We found this place online, a cute 2-story cottage right on the lake, not too far from Algonquin Provincial Park. The photos looked perfect, secluded enough to feel private, but not completely isolated. The owner mentioned great hiking trails, fishing spots, and canoe rentals nearby. What he didn't mention was the area's reputation for other things. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday. The drive up was beautiful. Rolling hills, dense forests, that crisp Ontario air. The cottage itself was everything we hoped for, rustic but comfortable, with a deck overlooking the water and a fire pit down by the shoreline. The kids immediately ran off to explore while Mark and I unpacked. That first day was normal. We settled in, made dinner, and decided to have a bonfire by the lake. The sun set around 8:30, and we were enjoying the peaceful evening, roasting marshmallows, watching the stars come out. The lake was like glass, perfectly reflecting the night sky. Around 10 o'clock, I heard it for the first time. A howl. But not just any howl. I've heard wolves before on camping trips. I know what coyotes sound like. This wasn't that. It echoed across the lake, seeming to come from the opposite shore about half a mile away. The sound was wrong somehow. Too deep at first, then rising to a pitch that made my skin crawl. It lasted maybe 6 or 7 seconds. "What was that?" Emma asked, scooting closer to Mark. "Probably just a wolf," he said, but I could tell from his expression he didn't believe it. "I've lived in Ontario my whole life. I've heard loons, moose, deer, every kind of wildlife you can imagine. This sound belonged to none of them." About 20 minutes later, we heard it again. This time, it seemed closer, maybe from the woods to our right, along the shoreline. Aidan, trying to act brave, said, "Maybe it's that Sasquatch they talk about around here." "What Sasquatch?" I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "I Googled this place while we were driving up," he said, shrugging. "There are tons of reports about Bigfoot sightings near Algonquin Park. Some guy even claimed he was chased by one last year." Mark laughed it off, but I couldn't shake my unease. We decided to head in around midnight, dousing the fire and gathering our things. As we walked back to the cottage, there was a loud snap from the tree line behind the building, like a thick branch breaking under something heavy. It couldn't have been more than 20 feet from the back door. We all froze. Mark whispered, "Probably just a deer." But deer don't snap branches that loudly. Whatever did, that was big. We hurried inside, locked the doors, and tried to laugh it off. The kids went to their room upstairs, and Mark and I settled into the master bedroom on the main floor. I had trouble falling asleep, listening to every creak and groan of the cottage. Around 2 in the morning, I finally drifted off. At exactly 3:31 in the morning, I remember looking at my phone. We were all jolted awake by what felt like something hitting the cottage. Not like a branch falling on the roof. This was more like something deliberately striking the building with force. The entire 2-story structure shook. The kids came running downstairs, Emma crying, Aidan trying not to look scared. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered, grabbing the flashlight from his nightstand. "Maybe it's a bear," I suggested, not believing it myself. Mark decided to check the cottage for damage. I went with him, refusing to let him go alone. We checked every room, every window, the foundation, even went out onto the deck with the flashlight. Nothing. No visible damage, no explanation for what could have made the whole building shake like that. The kids stayed in our room that night, all of us eventually falling into an uneasy sleep, except me. I stayed awake, listening. At about 15 minutes later, I heard it. A low, rumbling vocalization right outside our bedroom window. It was so deep it was almost below the range of human hearing, more felt than heard. A guttural, throaty sound that no human throat could produce. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before fading away. I nudged Mark, but he was in a deep sleep and just mumbled something unintelligible. I was frozen, unable to get up and look out the window, afraid of what I might see. The sound wasn't repeated, but at 4:15, I heard something else. A scraping noise along the exterior wall, like something running its hand or claw across the wooden siding. Then silence for the rest of the night. The next morning over breakfast, we tried to rationalize everything. Maybe it was a storm we slept through, though the sky had been clear. Maybe it was a bear, though bears don't howl like that. Mark suggested it could be locals messing with tourists, but we hadn't seen another soul since arriving. We spent that day trying to enjoy ourselves, went canoeing, hiked a nearby trail, had a picnic lunch. Everything felt normal in the daylight. We even joked about our midnight visitor. But as the sun started to set, I felt my anxiety returning. That second night we stayed inside, playing board games and watching a movie on the laptop we'd brought. But around 9:30, we heard them again, the howls. They seemed to be coming from the same direction as the night before, across the lake. Distant at first, but they continued intermittently for hours. I decided to try recording them on my phone. At first, I got nothing. They were too far away, or would stop as soon as I hit record, of course. But at 2:31 in the morning, my phone captured it perfectly. 4 distinct howls, each lasting about 5 seconds, with a 10-second pause between them. The recording still gives me chills when I listen to it. The howls continued until almost 5 in the morning. None of us slept well. The kids were clearly scared, though Aiden tried to play it cool. Emma asked if we could leave early, but we'd paid for the week and Mark thought we were all just feeding each other's imaginations. On the third night, something changed. The howls started earlier, around 8 o'clock, while there was still a bit of daylight left. And they were closer, no longer across the lake, but in the woods directly behind our cottage. I could feel the power behind those vocalizations. Whatever was making them had massive lungs and vocal cords. That night, at around 1 in the morning, we heard movement on the deck. Slow, heavy footsteps. Not sneaking, just casually walking around. Mark grabbed a kitchen knife and his flashlight, but I begged him not to go outside. Instead, he peered through the blinds. "I don't see anything," he whispered, but something was definitely out there. The footsteps stopped at our bedroom window, the same window where I'd heard that guttural sound the first night. There was silence for about 30 seconds, then a soft tapping on the glass. 3 distinct taps, like someone using their knuckle. Then the footsteps moved, away, down the steps of the deck and into the darkness. By the 4th night, I was convinced we were being circled, studied even. The sound seemed to come from different directions each time, as if whatever was out there was moving around our cottage, watching us from all angles. It never approached during daylight, but as soon as the sun went down, the activity would start. Mark finally admitted this wasn't normal wildlife behavior. "No animal circles a location like this for days," he said quietly, while the kids were out on the lake that afternoon. "They either approach or they stay away." "So what do you think it is?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. But I'm starting to think Aiden's Sasquatch theory isn't so crazy. That 4th night was the worst. The howls were so close, they seemed to be right at the edge of the clearing our cottage sat in. And they were answered by other similar howls from across the lake, like they were communicating. Around midnight, something large moved through the underbrush circling our cottage. We could hear branches snapping, leaves rustling, not trying to be stealthy at all, almost like it wanted us to know it was there. At 2 in the morning, there was a powerful vocalization right outside our living room window, so loud it seemed to vibrate the glass. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, starting as a deep, rumbling growl and transitioning into something like a roar, but with modulation that seemed almost language-like. I managed to record this one too. When I played it back the next day, we noticed something we hadn't heard in real time. After the main vocalization, there was a series of what sounded like knocks or slaps, like something hitting wood in a rhythmic pattern. On our 5th day, I searched the property for footprints or any physical evidence. The ground was mostly pine needles and hard-packed dirt, not great for tracking. But near the fire pit, I found an area where the undergrowth had been pushed aside, creating a sort of path leading into the woods. It was about 3 feet wide, wider than any game trail I've seen. That night, we decided to leave the outside light on. Maybe it would deter whatever was out there. It didn't. The howls started again at sunset, and at 11:23 the light went out, not like a power failure, just that specific light. When Mark checked the next morning, the bulb had been unscrewed just enough to break the connection. On our final night, We packed up most of our things, planning to leave at first light rather than our scheduled checkout time. None of us could take another night of this. We were exhausted, jumpy, and even Mark was openly spooked now. That night was strangely quiet. No howls, no movement outside. It was almost worse than the activity, the waiting, wondering what had changed. Then, at 4 in the morning, a massive impact hit the side of the cottage, like something had thrown its weight against the wall. The whole building shuddered. Picture frames fell off the walls. A glass in the kitchen vibrated off the counter and shattered. Then another impact on the opposite wall. Then the back wall. It was like whatever was out there was trying to find a way in, or trying to frighten us. We huddled in the living room, the kids crying, Mark holding his pathetic kitchen knife. I had 911 dialed on my phone, but didn't press call. What would I even say? There's a Sasquatch attacking our rental cottage. The impact stopped as suddenly as they'd started. Then, in the silence that followed, a long, low vocalization right outside our front door. Not a howl this time, something different, almost like humming. A deep, resonant sound that went on for nearly a minute. Then footsteps walking away, heavy enough to make the wooden steps of the porch creak. We left at first light, throwing our remaining things into the car haphazardly. As we pulled away, I looked back at the cottage and swear I saw movement at the edge of the tree line, something large stepping back into the shadows. I've thought about this experience every day since. I've researched Sasquatch encounters in the Algonquin Park area and found dozens of similar reports. The vocalizations, the circling behavior, the physical interactions with buildings. Whatever was watching us at Lake Spectacle, I'm convinced it wasn't human, and it wasn't any known animal. The recordings I have don't do justice to the power of those sounds in person. The way they resonated in your chest, how they seemed to contain patterns that felt almost like communication. I haven't shown the recordings to anyone except my family. I'm not sure I want to become that crazy Sasquatch lady, but I know what we experienced, and I know I'm never going back to Lake Spectacle again. Story 5. I've never really talked about this outside of my immediate family. It's been over 30 years now, but what happened still wakes me up at night sometimes. I guess I need to get this off my chest, finally. Back in July of '89, I took my kids camping near Mio, Michigan. We used to go a few times every year. It was our special place. Nothing fancy, just a clearing in the woods not far from the Osable River where we could pitch tents, cook over a fire, and forget about the rest of the world for a while. My wife Nancy stayed home that trip. She had some summer classes she was teaching. It was just me, my daughter Kelly, 12 at the time, and my son Mike, 10. We'd arrived that afternoon, set up camp, and spent the day fishing and hiking. The kids were always energetic outdoors. City life made them antsy, but put them in the woods, and they'd run wild until they wore themselves out. We had a good dinner of hot dogs and beans cooked over the fire. Simple camping food always tastes better outdoors, doesn't it? As it got dark, we sat around the fire telling stories. Nothing scary. I never liked filling their heads with that stuff while we were out in the woods. Just funny family stories, jokes, that kind of thing. Mike had brought this hammock he'd gotten for his birthday, and he and Kelly were sharing it about 15 feet from the fire. I was sitting in my green lawn chair, the canvas one I'd had forever, just watching the flames and enjoying the quiet. It must have been close to midnight. The fire was burning down to embers, and I was thinking about calling it a night when, God, even now it's hard to describe what happened next. There was no warning, no snapping twigs, no rustling leaves. 1 second I was alone with my thoughts, and the next, something massive moved behind me. I didn't even see it clearly, just sensed this huge, dark shape either leap over me or rush past me. I still don't know which. The strangest part was my reaction, or rather, my lack of reaction. It was like I was suddenly paralyzed, not physically, I don't think, but mentally, like my brain just stopped. I couldn't process what was happening, couldn't move, couldn't shout, couldn't do anything but sit there like I was watching everything happen from outside my own body. It was like being drugged or in some kind of trance. I've never experienced anything like it before or since. The kids, though, they saw it. Whatever it was, triggered something primal in them. They flew out of that hammock so fast, I didn't even see them get up. They just went from lying there to sprinting toward our van, parked about 30 yards away. They hit the side of that van so hard, they actually dented the metal. I'm not exaggerating. There were hand and body-shaped indentations in the paneling that I had to get fixed later. That's how terrified they were, how desperate to get away. As this thing passed, and it happened in seconds, it made a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a growl or a roar like an animal. It was a scream, a high-pitched, almost human-like scream, but wrong somehow. Too powerful, too primal. It echoed through the trees and seemed to physically vibrate through my chest. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone, crashing away into the darkness of the woods. When I finally snapped out of whatever state I was in, I ran to the van. The kids were huddled inside, both of them crying. Kelly was trying to comfort Mike, but she was shaking so bad herself she could barely speak. When I asked them what they saw, they couldn't really describe it. Big, they kept saying, really big and dark. Mike thought it had glowing eyes, but Kelly wasn't sure. They both agreed it moved faster than anything they'd ever seen. The weird thing is what happened next, or what didn't happen. We didn't pack up, we didn't drive away. Looking back, I can't understand why. It's like that paralysis that hit me when the thing first appeared never fully wore off. I got the kids calmed down enough that they eventually fell asleep in the van. I went back to the campsite, built up the fire again, and sat there with my hunting knife in my hand until morning. When daylight came, we packed up without talking much and drove home. We never went back to that spot again, never even discussed returning. It was like we all silently agreed that place was off limits forever. I might have convinced myself it was a bear. That's what the rational part of my brain wanted to believe. Except this wasn't the first time we'd experienced something unexplainable in the Michigan woods. 3 years earlier, in '86, we were camping along the Manistee River near Cadillac. We'd taken a 2-day canoe trip, the 4 of us. Nancy came on that one. We'd pulled off the river in the evening to set up camp on this little sandy beach area. It was a good spot, flat and open, with the river on one side and dense forest on the other. I was always the first one up in the morning. I liked to get the fire going again and have coffee ready before everyone else woke up. The sun was just starting to come up, and there was this mist hanging over the river. Beautiful, peaceful morning. I unzipped the tent, stepped out, stretched, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet away, was something. Not a bear, not a deer. It was standing upright, about 5 or 6 feet tall, covered in black fur. It wasn't as massive as whatever rushed past us years later in Mio, but it wasn't any animal that should have been in those woods. The strangest part was its face. It looked almost human, but not quite. The eyes were set deeper, the brow more pronounced, but there was an intelligence there. It was watching me calmly, almost curiously, not threatening, not aggressive, just observing. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then it simply turned and walked away into the trees. Not running, not frightened, just calmly walking away on 2 legs. I stood there frozen until it disappeared from sight. I never told Nancy or the kids what I saw that morning. I made up some excuse about not feeling well, and we packed up early and went home. I gave up canoeing after that trip. Sold our canoe the following spring. The woods just didn't feel safe anymore. After the Mio incident in '89, I started researching, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. I found scattered reports of similar encounters throughout Michigan's northern forests. Not many, just enough to let me know we weren't alone in what we'd seen. Most people didn't talk about these things. afraid of being labeled crazy or attention-seeking. The kids and I never really discussed it at length after it happened. When they got older, they'd occasionally reference it. Remember that thing at Mio? But we never sat down and analyzed it. Mike had nightmares for months afterward. Kelly became afraid of the dark well into her teens. I blame myself for not protecting them better, for freezing when they needed me. The screaming still haunts me, the most. Sometimes when I'm half asleep, I hear it again, that inhuman, yet almost human sound echoing through the trees. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a mountain lion, though they're not supposed to be in Michigan anymore. Maybe it was some kind of territorial display by a bear, though bears don't typically scream like that. Maybe it was just the wind playing tricks, combined with our heightened senses in the dark. But I know what the kids saw. I know what I felt rush past me, and I know what I saw that morning by the Manistee River. There's something out there in the Michigan forests that science hasn't classified, that most people will never encounter, and that those who do rarely talk about. I'm 63 now. The kids are grown with families of their own. Nancy passed 5 years ago, cancer. The kids still take their families camping, but I notice they stick to designated campgrounds, places with lots of other people around. They never go deep into the woods anymore, neither do I. Sometimes I wonder if that thing is still out there, whatever it was. I wonder if it remembers us the way we remember it. I wonder if it was just passing through that night, or if we unknowingly set up camp in its territory. I wonder if others have encountered it since and, like us, have kept their stories mostly to themselves. I still can't explain the paralysis I felt. Was it fear, some kind of defense mechanism in my brain, or was it something the creature itself caused somehow? I've read accounts of people feeling unusually calm or frozen during unexplainable encounters. Maybe there's something to that. The rational part of me wants to dismiss it all, blame it on imagination, on the darkness playing tricks, on the suggestive power of being in the wilderness at night. But then I remember the dents in the van, where my terrified children slammed into it. I remember the look in their eyes the next morning, and I remember that face watching me from the edge. Of the forest 3 years earlier, not quite human, not quite animal, but undeniably real. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. I'm not sure I would if someone else told it to me. But it happened. Something was out there with us that night. Something screamed, and 30+ years later, I still don't know what it was. Story 6. I never thought I'd be writing this down, but I need to get it out of my system. It's been almost 1.5 years since that night in August 2022, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. I've owned my property on the Oregon coast for about 7 years now. It's a beautiful piece of land, about 15 acres backed up against state forest. I bought it as a weekend getaway from Portland, somewhere to decompress and enjoy nature. The locals have always had stories about Bigfoot. I used to laugh them off as tourist trap nonsense, you know, the same way coastal towns have sea monster legends or whatever. There are Bigfoot souvenirs in every shop, Sasquatch crossing signs people put up as jokes. I never took any of it seriously. That night in August, I was doing what I always do before turning in, putting out the campfire and taking a moment to watch for deer. There's this grassy median between the highway lanes near my property, and deer absolutely love it. Most nights, especially in summer, you'll see anywhere from 10 to 20 of them grazing there. It's peaceful, almost meditative to watch them. The moon was nearly full that night, bright enough that I didn't even need my flashlight to walk around. Perfect conditions for deer spotting, but something was off. There wasn't a single deer out there, not one. In all my years owning the property, I'd never seen the median completely empty on a clear summer night. I remember checking my watch. It was around 11:30. Prime time for deer activity. The absence was strange enough that I stood there longer than usual, scanning the roadway in both directions. It was dead quiet too. Usually, you'd hear distant traffic or animals rustling in the brush. That night, nothing. The silence felt heavy, if that makes sense. That's when I noticed what looked like a very large man walking under one of the streetlights about 200 feet down the road. The streetlights along that stretch are pretty far apart, so they create these pools of light with darkness between them. This figure appeared at the edge of one of those pools of light. My first thought was that it was odd for someone to be walking along the highway that late. We don't get many pedestrians out here. It's rural, and the nearest town is about 5 miles away, but I figured maybe someone's car had broken down. The figure was tall, really tall. At first, I rationalized it as just a big guy, maybe 6.5 feet. He was walking normally on 2 legs, but there was something about his movements that seemed deliberate, calculated. He was wearing dark clothing, or at least that's what I told myself at the time. I watched as he reached the cross street, a small access road that intersects the highway. Instead of using it like any normal person would, he made a sharp left turn and descended into the roadside ditch. The ditch is about 4 feet deep there, lined with tall grass and small bushes. I remember thinking, why would anyone go down into the ditch instead of using the road? I squinted, trying to make out what he was doing. Maybe he dropped something. Maybe he was drunk. I kept watching, expecting him to climb back out. What happened next? I've tried to explain it away for months, but I can't. Something emerged from the ditch about 10 feet from where the figure had entered, but it wasn't a man standing upright anymore. It was crawling on all fours, and not crawling like a human would crawl. This thing was flat against the ground, belly down, moving in a way that made my skin crawl. The creature was massive. It took up an entire lane of the highway, that's at least 10 feet wide. Its body was maybe 3 feet across. In the moonlight, I could make out a dark, bulky form sliding across the asphalt like some kind of nightmare. My brain immediately tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It's a dog, I told myself, just a big dog. But there's no dog on this planet that's 10 feet long while crawling on its belly. And where had the man gone? He never came out of the ditch. It was like he had transformed. The thing moved with purpose, its limbs extending and contracting in a fluid motion that didn't seem right for any animal I know. It never looked in my direction, just kept its face pointed forward as it made its way across the road and into the brush on the other side. I stood there frozen, unable to move or call out. My breath was caught in my throat. I remember my hands shaking so badly I had to shove them in my pockets. The whole sighting probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like time had stretched out. After it disappeared into the vegetation on the far side of the highway, I finally managed to move. I practically ran back to my cabin, locked every door and window, and sat on my bed with a baseball bat until morning. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I went to check the ditch and the road in daylight. I don't know what I expected to find. Footprints, maybe. There was nothing. The grass in the ditch was disturbed, but that could have been from anything. For weeks afterward, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, or that there was some logical explanation. Maybe it was 2 separate things, a person walking and then a bear or something crossing the road later. But I know what I saw. The timing was too perfect, the transition too seamless. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? I've always been the skeptical type, the guy who rolls his eyes at ghost stories and Bigfoot sightings. Now here I was, having seen something I couldn't explain. About 4 months later in December, I attended this environmental conservation conference in Seattle. One of the speakers was discussing wildlife corridors, and he made a passing reference to spider crawl behavior being reported in urban Sasquatch sightings. Just that phrase, spider crawl, hit me like a truck. That's exactly what the movement reminded me of. My hands started shaking, and I had to excuse myself from the room. I broke down crying in the hallway as everything from that night came flooding back. An older gentleman found me there and asked if I was okay. Something about his kind face made me spill everything. Turns out he was a retired forest ranger from our county. When I finished my story, he wasn't laughing or looking at me like I was crazy. He just nodded and said, "You're not the first to see something like that around there." He told me that the local police in our area have an unofficial policy about Bigfoot reports. They don't put them in official records, but they don't dismiss them either. Apparently, there's been a history of similar sightings going back decades. The transformation from walking upright to crawling on all fours, he'd heard that specific detail before. Since that night, I can't look at the woods the same way. I used to love hiking alone on my property, especially at dusk. Now, I'm back in the city most of the time. When I do visit my land, I'm inside before dark, doors locked, blinds drawn. I've spent countless hours researching similar encounters. There are more than you'd think, but most people are afraid to talk about them publicly. The thing that haunts me most is wondering why it changed from walking upright to crawling. Was the bipedal form some kind of camouflage? Was it trying to appear human until it thought no one was watching? And if so, how many times have all of us, seen something that wasn't what it appeared to be? The deer still haven't returned to the median in the same numbers. Usually there are just 3 or 4 now, and they seem skittish, always looking around. Animals know things we don't. I haven't told many people about this. My family would think I've lost it. My friends would say I was half asleep and seeing things. But I know what I saw. That creature was real. The transformation was real. And knowing that something like that exists out there, potentially watching us while we're completely unaware, it changes you. Last week, I was taking out the trash at dusk and heard something moving in the tree line. I didn't stick around to investigate. Some things you don't want to confirm. Some mysteries should stay mysteries. But every time I drive past that streetlight and that ditch, I can't help but slow down and look. Part of me is terrified I'll see it again. But another part, the part that keeps me up at night, is terrified that next time it'll be looking right at me. I still don't know what it was. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, something else entirely. The label doesn't really matter. What matters is that it exists, and it's out there, and sometimes it walks among us before dropping to all fours when it thinks we aren't looking. And I can't unsee it. I can't unlearn what I now know. That night in August didn't just change what I believe. It changed how I move through the world. Every shadow holds a question now. Every rustle in the brush makes me freeze, and every tall figure I see in the distance makes me hold my breath until I can confirm it's human. Because now I know that looking human doesn't always mean being human. Story 7. I've debated posting this for years. What happened to me in March 2001 has haunted me for over 20 years now. I've told a few close friends, but most people just give me that look. You know the one, like I'm making it up or exaggerating. I'm not. I know what I saw that day at Lake Shasta caverns, and it wasn't anything that should exist in our world. Back then, I was 23 and working as a tour guide at Lake Shasta caverns in Northern California. It was a decent job for a young guy without a college degree. The pay wasn't great, but I enjoyed showing tourists through the beautiful limestone caves and telling them about the history and geology of the place. Most days were pretty routine. Greet the tourists, take them on the boat across the lake, ride the bus up the mountain, guide them through the caverns, then reverse the whole process to get back. That particular day in March was unusually quiet. It was a Thursday afternoon, cloudy and foggy with a weird stillness in the air. The kind of day where sounds carry farther than they should. We'd only had 2 tour groups that morning, and I was scheduled to lead the final tour of the day at 3:30. I remember checking my watch repeatedly that afternoon, hoping no one would show up so I could close early and head home. Around 3:15, I was standing at the overlook near the cavern entrance, just killing time and looking out at the lake below. The fog had settled into patches, hovering over the water in these eerie, unmoving clumps. The whole scene felt off somehow, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Just as I was about to radio down to the boat dock to see if any last-minute visitors had arrived, I heard the unmistakable sound of our tour bus laboring up the steep mountain road. My heart sank a little. So much for closing early. The bus pulled into the small parking area, and I put on my tour guide smile as the doors opened. To my surprise, only 2 people stepped out, a couple in their early 30s. The man had a professional-looking camera hanging around his neck, and the woman was bundled up in a North Face jacket, looking cold despite the mild temperature. "Looks like it's just you two today," I said, trying to sound upbeat. "I'm Noah, and I'll be your guide through the caverns." They introduced themselves as Mike and Jennifer from Sacramento. They seemed nice enough, explaining they were amateur photographers hoping to get some unique cave shots. We chatted for a few minutes while waiting for our official tour start time. I remember explaining that the low visitor count wasn't unusual for a weekday in March. The busy season wouldn't start for another month or 2. We were standing at the mountaintop overlook, and I was pointing out some landmarks across the lake when we all heard it at the same time. A strange, rustling noise coming from the trees across the ravine, maybe 500 yards away. At first, I thought it might be wind, but the air was completely still. Then came the thumps. Deep, heavy thumps that seemed to vibrate through the ground. It reminded me of the T-Rex scene from Jurassic Park, that rhythmic booming that you feel more than hear. But this was real, and it was happening right in front of us. "What is that?" Jennifer asked, her voice tight with tension. I didn't answer because I had no idea. In all my time working at the caverns, I'd never heard anything like it. The sound was getting louder, which meant whatever was making it was getting closer. Mike raised his camera and peered through the telephoto lens, scanning the hillside opposite us. "There's something weird over there," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Look at that path coming down the hillside." He handed me the camera, and I looked through the viewfinder. What I saw made my skin crawl. Cutting down the steep hillside toward the lake was what looked like a trench, a wide path where undergrowth had been pushed aside or trampled. It wasn't like any hiking trail I'd ever seen. This looked fresh and haphazard, like something huge had just barreled through. As I watched, the tops of several large pine trees began swaying violently. We're talking about 60-foot trees, moving like they were being shoved aside. There was no wind. Nothing else in the forest was moving. Just these. Trees, one after another, marking a path of something moving rapidly toward the lake. "What the hell?" I whispered, still looking through the camera. And then it happened. A massive figure burst from the tree line into a small clearing about halfway down the hillside. Even through the camera lens, I couldn't make out clear details because it was moving so fast. But what I could see was enough to make my blood run cold. It was big, not bear big, bigger. It ran on 2 legs, with a bizarre loping gait that covered ground at an impossible speed. Its arms, and they were definitely arms, not front legs, swung in wide arcs at its sides. The whole body seemed to be a uniform dark color, like deep brown or black. I only saw it for maybe 3 seconds before it disappeared back into the dense vegetation, but those seconds are burned into my memory forever. The way it moved was nothing like a human or any animal I'd ever seen. It had this terrible power and purpose to its movement. I lowered the camera, my hands shaking so badly I was afraid I'd drop it. Mike and Jennifer were both frozen in place, staring at the hillside. "Did you?" Jennifer started to ask. "Yeah," Mike cut her off. "I saw it." We stood there listening as the creature continued its descent toward the lake. The thumping footfalls grew fainter, but were still audible, rhythmic and deliberate, until they finally faded completely. None of us spoke for what felt like several minutes. I was trying to rationalize what I'd just witnessed. A bear walking upright? Some guy in a costume? But I knew better. No bear moves like that, and no human being could be that size or move with that kind of speed through dense forest. My hands were still shaking when I raised my radio to call down to the dock staff. "Hey, this is Noah up top. We just..." We just saw something weird coming down the far hillside toward the lake. Keep an eye out, okay? My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. The radio crackled. What kind of weird? Like an animal? I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. Yeah, something big. Just stay alert. I turned to Mike and Jennifer, who were both visibly shaken. Do you want to continue with the tour, or would you rather head back down? They exchanged a look, and Mike shrugged. We came all this way. Might as well see the caves. I think all three of us were grateful for the distraction. The tour itself passed in a blur. I recited my usual facts about stalactites and stalagmites, pointed out the interesting formations, and answered their questions on autopilot. My mind was still on the hillside, replaying those few seconds of seeing that thing burst from the trees. After the tour, we rode the bus back down in near silence. As we approached the dock, I scanned the shoreline, half expecting to see the creature again, but there was nothing unusual. The lake was calm, the opposite shore quiet. The boat ride back to the main dock was tense. Mike kept his camera ready, and Jennifer huddled close to him. I could tell they were just as freaked out as I was, though we all tried to act normal. Back at the visitor center, I clocked out as quickly as possible. I didn't want to talk to my co-workers about what happened, not yet anyway. I needed time to process it myself. The couple thanked me awkwardly for the tour and headed to their car. I noticed Mike checking his camera, probably reviewing any photos he might have captured. I wished I'd asked him to send me copies. That night, I was camping with some friends about 5 miles from the caverns. I hadn't planned to mention the incident, but after a few beers around the campfire, I found myself describing what we'd seen. My friends reacted with the expected skepticism and jokes about Bigfoot. Then something strange happened that made everything worse. A U.S. Border Patrol agent wandered over to our campfire. This wasn't unusual. They patrolled the recreation areas regularly, especially during fire season. He was friendly enough, asking how long we'd been camping and reminding us to fully extinguish our fire before turning in. As he was about to leave, something compelled me to speak up. Hey, this might sound weird, but have you guys ever gotten reports about, unusual wildlife sightings around here? Specifically near the caverns? I expected a laugh or a dismissive comment. Instead, the agent paused and gave me an oddly serious look. You saw something today? The way he asked it, like he already knew the answer, sent chills down my spine. I nodded. Yeah, across the ravine from the cavern entrance. Big, moving fast on 2 legs. The agent sighed and glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening. Some of the guys at the station call it Littlefoot. Ironic name considering we've had reports for years. Nothing official, of course. He said it so matter-of-factly, like we were discussing deer sightings or the weather. Then he just nodded goodnight and walked away, leaving me sitting there with my mind completely blown. My friends thought the whole interaction was hilarious, but I couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled in my stomach. The agent hadn't questioned what I saw, hadn't asked for details, hadn't acted surprised at all. He'd given it a name. I quit my job at Lake Shasta Caverns the following week, made up some excuse about moving to be closer to family. The truth was, I couldn't face being up on that mountain again, especially not alone. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig would have me looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that massive figure crashing through the trees. It's been over 20 years now, and I've never gone back to Lake Shasta. I've researched similar sightings in Northern California, and there are more than you'd think. Sometimes I wonder about Mike and Jennifer, if they ever shared their photos or told their story. As for me, I still wake up sometimes with the sound of those heavy footfalls in my ears, the image of those swaying. Treetops fresh in my mind. Whatever we saw that day wasn't supposed to exist, but it does. And the most terrifying part, the authorities know about it. They've named it, and they've chosen to say nothing. Story 8. I've been debating whether to post this for months now. I'm not the type of person who believes in the supernatural or monsters or any of that stuff. I'm a practical guy. I work construction. I fish on weekends. I drink beer with my buddies. Nothing special. But something happened last year that I just can't explain, and it's been eating at me ever since. It was a Sunday night in late October, the kind of fall evening where it's still warm enough to be outside without freezing your ass off, but cool enough that you need a light jacket. My buddy Damon and I had spent the day helping his cousin move furniture, and afterward we just wanted to chill. We ended up driving out to this spot along the Simaran River that locals hang out at sometimes. It's about 20 minutes outside of town, secluded enough that you can just park and relax without being bothered. There was a full moon that night. I remember because it was ridiculously bright. Like, bright enough that we didn't even need the headlights on to see the dirt road leading down to our usual spot. Damon kept joking about werewolves and shit as we pulled up. If I'd known what was coming, I wouldn't have laughed. We parked near this clearing that looks out over the river, maybe 50 yards from the tree line. The moonlight was reflecting off the water, and you could see everything almost like it was daytime, just with that weird blue-silver tint that moonlight gives. We were just sitting in my old Chevy pickup with the windows down, music playing low, talking about nothing important. Damon was going on about this girl he'd met at his gym, asking if I thought he should ask her out, or if it would be weird since they work out at the same place. Normal shit. After about an hour of just sitting there talking, I needed to take a leak. I got out and walked maybe 10 yards toward the trees, far enough away from the truck for privacy, but not actually into the woods. I remember Damon yelling something stupid like, "Watch out for snakes," as I walked away. I was just standing there doing my business when I heard something moving in the brush ahead of me. At first, I didn't think much of it. There's always raccoons, possums, and deer out there. The sound was subtle, just some leaves rustling and twigs snapping. But then the movement became more distinct, more deliberate. It didn't sound like a small animal anymore. I squinted toward the tree line, half expecting to see the glowing eyes of a coyote or something reflected in the moonlight. But what caught my eye wasn't at ground level. It was movement from much higher up, behind the first row of trees. That's when I saw it. From behind a cluster of oak trees, a massive figure slowly emerged. I'm not exaggerating when I say massive. This thing was huge. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. It had incredibly broad shoulders, like a linebacker on steroids. The entire upper body appeared to be covered in dark hair or fur. I couldn't tell which in the moonlight, but it definitely wasn't clothing. I froze completely. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't yell, couldn't do anything but stand there with my pants still partially undone, staring at this thing. It's hard to describe exactly what I saw because the moonlight only showed its silhouette clearly. But I know what I didn't see. It wasn't a bear standing on its hind legs. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. This was something else entirely. The proportions were all wrong for a bear. The shoulders were too broad, the waist too narrow. The head sat directly on those shoulders without much of a neck, but it was smaller in proportion than a bear's head would be. The way it moved was the strangest part. It stepped out from behind the trees with this weird, fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so big. It moved like it weighed nothing, despite its size. For what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 seconds or so, we just stood there, me and this thing, looking at each other. I don't know if it could see me clearly or if it was just aware of my presence somehow. There was no sound, except for my own pulse pounding in my ears. Then it moved again. It shifted its weight and took a half step forward, and that broke whatever spell had been keeping me frozen in place. I ran. I didn't even bother zipping up properly. I just turned and sprinted back to my truck like my life depended on it. I must have looked like a complete lunatic to Damon, bursting into the truck, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. "Drive!" I shouted at him. "We need to go right now." Damon looked confused, but must have seen the panic on my face because he didn't argue. I threw the truck in reverse, spun it around, and tore out of there, spitting gravel and dust behind us. "What the hell, man?" Damon kept asking as I drove like a maniac back toward the main road. "What happened? Did you see a snake or something?" I couldn't even form the words to explain. I just kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing chasing after us. It wasn't until we were back on the highway that I slowed down and tried to explain what I'd seen. At first, Damon thought I was messing with him, but something about the way my hands were still shaking on the steering wheel must have convinced him I wasn't joking. "Maybe it was just a really big dude," he suggested, "like some hunter or something." But I knew better. No human moves like that. No human is that size. The craziest part? After about 20 minutes of driving around, Damon convinced me to go back. I know that sounds insane, but curiosity is a powerful thing, and with Damon there insisting it was probably nothing, I started to doubt myself. Maybe it was just a weird shadow. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. So we went back, driving slowly this time, high beams on. We pulled up to the same spot and sat there with the engine running, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Whatever had been there was gone, if it had ever been there at all. But I know what I saw. That thing had been about 40 feet in front of me, close enough that even in just moonlight I could make out its general shape and size. And you know what's weird? I didn't smell anything unusual. All those Bigfoot stories talk about some horrible stench, but there was nothing like that. I didn't tell anyone else about it for weeks. Who would believe me? But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying that moment in my head, trying to convince myself it was just a bear or a guy in a costume or something. But I know it wasn't. About a month later, I finally broke down and mentioned it to my grandmother. She's lived in this area her entire life, and I figured if anyone would laugh it off and tell me I was being ridiculous, it would be her. But she didn't laugh. Instead, she got really quiet and asked me exactly where I'd been that night. When I told her, she nodded like she wasn't surprised at all. "That area has always had strange sightings," she told me. "When I was a girl, my father warned us never to go near that bend in the river after dark. People have heard things out there for years, unusual sounds, shapes moving among the trees. A few have seen something like what you described." She told me about the old quarry site that sits about a half-mile behind those woods. It was abandoned back in the 60s, leaving all sorts of deep cuts in the earth and tunnels that nobody uses anymore. The whole area around there is filled with caves and hidden places where, as my grandmother put it, things could live without being seen much. I've driven past that spot on the river dozens of times since that night, always during the day, always with someone else in the car. I haven't gone back to that exact clearing, though. I don't think I ever will. At least not after sunset. What bothers me most isn't just what I saw. It's the way it looked at me. There was an awareness there, an intelligence behind whatever eyes were studying me from that massive silhouette. It wasn't just some animal reacting on instinct. It was watching me, considering me. I've gone back and forth between trying to convince myself it was nothing and knowing deep down that it was definitely something. I've researched online, read accounts from people who claim to have seen similar things. Some of the details match up with what I experienced, the height, the broad shoulders, the way it moved. But nothing I've read fully captures what I saw that night. Damon and I don't talk about it much anymore. I think he half believes me, but he also thinks I might have been seeing things in the moonlight. He's probably right. That's what I try to tell myself anyway. But some nights, when I'm lying in bed unable to sleep, I can still picture that silhouette perfectly. The impossible breadth of those shoulders, the fluid way it moved despite its size, the feeling that washed over me when it took that half step toward me. I can't explain it, can't rationalize it away completely. The locals have always had stories about strange things in the woods around here. Most people dismiss them as campfire tales or excuses for weird noises in the night. I used to be one of those people. Not anymore. I don't know what's out there in the woods along the Simaran River, I don't know if it's still there or if it's moved on. Part of me hopes I'll never find out for sure. Another part of me can't stop wondering about it. All I know is that on a clear, moonlit Sunday night last October, I saw something that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, when I drive past that area and glance toward those trees, I can't shake the feeling that it's still there, watching and waiting in the shadows. Story 9. I've been hesitating to write this down for so long. It's been 27 years, but I still get this knot in my stomach whenever I think about it. I've told only a handful of people over the years, usually getting those looks like I'm either crazy or making it up for attention. But I know what I saw that evening in the summer of '96, and I'm tired of keeping it bottled up. Back then, I was living in a modest ranch-style house just outside Commerce, Georgia. It was a nice little neighborhood, not fancy by any means, but peaceful. My backyard extended to this patch of woods with a small runoff pond about 30 yards in. Nothing special, just a depression that would fill up during heavy rains to keep the neighborhood from flooding. The previous owners had cleared a little walking path along the edge of the property line, which made it perfect for taking my chocolate lab Cooper on his evening walks. That particular evening in July, I remember it was a Thursday because my favorite show had just ended, and I figured I'd take Cooper out before the news came on. The air had that sticky Georgia summer feel to it. The sun was just starting to set, painting everything in this golden orange glow. It had rained earlier, so there was that earthy smell in the air, and the mosquitoes were out in full force. I remember slapping at my arms as Cooper and I made our way down to the edge of the woods. Cooper was about 4 years old then, full of energy but well-trained. He was the kind of dog who would investigate everything but always come back when called. I let him off the leash once we reached the tree line, something I did every evening without a second thought. While he sniffed around, I just stood there enjoying the sunset, thinking about what I needed to get done the next day at work. I remember checking my watch. It was around 8:45. And though the sun was setting, there was still plenty of light to see by. Cooper had wandered about 15 feet away, nose to the ground, tail wagging happily as he investigated whatever sense caught his attention. Everything felt completely normal. Then I heard it, this rustling sound coming from the other side of the pond, deep in the brush. At first I didn't think much of it. We had deer, raccoons, and all sorts of wildlife in those woods. But something changed in the atmosphere almost immediately. It's hard to explain, but it was like the woods got quieter, if that makes sense. I glanced over at Cooper, and what I saw sent this cold feeling up my spine. He was completely frozen, standing perfectly still, with his ears perked forward and his body rigid. I'd never seen him like that before. Cooper wasn't a fearful dog. He'd bark at strangers or chase squirrels without hesitation, but this was different. He wasn't barking or growling. He was just still, watching. I followed his gaze across the pond, squinting slightly in the fading light. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then something moved between two large oak trees on the far side, maybe 90 to 100 yards away from where we stood. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. It was massive, way too big to be a person. My first thought was bear, but as it moved more into the clearing, I realized it wasn't a bear either. This thing was walking upright on two legs, completely vertical, and moving with this strange smoothness that didn't seem right for something so big. I remember thinking it had to be at least 10 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in this dark, shaggy hair, not quite black, more like a deep brown, and had these incredibly broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. What struck me most were its arms. They hung down way lower than a person's would, swinging slightly as it walked. The proportions were all wrong for a human, and the sheer bulk of its upper body suggested power that I can't even begin to describe. I couldn't make out facial features clearly from that distance in the dimming light, but I could see its silhouette perfectly against the backdrop of lighter trees. There was absolutely no mistaking this for a person in a costume. The movements were too fluid, too natural. And the size, God, the size of it. No human could have faked that. Cooper and I just stood there, completely frozen. I was terrified that if I moved, it would see us and come charging over. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't even call for Cooper because I was afraid to make any sound. But he seemed to understand. He didn't make a move either. For what felt like forever, but was probably about 2 minutes, we watched this thing moving through the trees. It was walking at an angle away from us, not in any hurry, just methodically making its way through the woods like it had somewhere specific to be. Then something happened that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. The creature stopped. It just stopped moving altogether and slowly turned its head toward us. I know it saw us. I know it did. There was this moment, this horrible, breathless moment, where it just seemed to acknowledge our presence. It wasn't surprised. It wasn't aggressive. It just noticed us. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds, it turned back around and continued walking. Its stride was long and confident, covering ground quickly without seeming to hurry. Within moments, it disappeared behind the tree line deeper in the forest, and then the woods fell silent again. I don't remember consciously deciding to leave. My body just started backing up, and I somehow managed to whisper Cooper's name. He didn't need any encouragement. He was right by my side in an instant. We didn't run, though every cell in my body was screaming at me to sprint back to the house. Instead, we backed away slowly until we reached the edge of my yard, and then we walked briskly to the house. Once inside, I locked every door and window. I remember my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. Cooper wouldn't leave my side for the rest of the night, and he kept looking out the windows toward the woods. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every little sound outside. The next morning in the daylight, part of me wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But Cooper's behavior told me otherwise. He refused to go near the woods for weeks afterward. When I finally worked up the courage to go back to the edge of the property during broad daylight, I looked for footprints or any evidence of what I'd seen, but the ground was covered in pine needles and leaves. If there had been tracks, I couldn't find them. I didn't tell anyone about it right away. Who would believe me? I didn't even know what to call what I'd seen. It wasn't until years later, when I happened across a TV show about Bigfoot sightings, that I realized what I might have encountered. The descriptions matched almost exactly what I saw that evening. I've spent countless hours since then reading about similar sightings in the southeast, especially in the Appalachian regions, not far from where I lived. Northeast Georgia has its share of remote, densely wooded areas where something like that could potentially live undetected. I've learned that the area has a history of such sightings going back decades, though most people keep quiet about them for the same reasons I did. Some people have suggested it might have been a black bear standing on its hind legs, but I've seen bears in the wild before. This was no bear. Bears don't walk distances on 2 legs with that kind of smoothness and purpose. They certainly don't have the proportions I saw, with those impossibly long arms and that massive upper body. And they don't turn and acknowledge you with that kind of awareness. Others have suggested it was someone playing a prank in a costume, but that's even more ridiculous. No costume could replicate the natural movement I witnessed, and nobody could have added 3 or 4 feet to their height while maintaining that kind of mobility. Plus, who would be wandering alone in those woods at dusk in a costume? It makes no sense. What bothers me most, even after all these years, is that moment when it turned and looked at us. There was intelligence there, recognition. It knew we were watching it, and it decided we weren't worth bothering with. That implies a level of thinking that still unnerves me. I moved away from that house about 2 years later for unrelated reasons, a job opportunity in another state. Cooper lived to be 14 before I had to put him down due to hip problems, but neither of us ever forgot what we saw. For months after the incident, he would growl at the woods from the safety of our backyard. He never again wandered freely near the tree line like he used to. I've been back to Commerce a few times over the years to visit old friends. Each time I've driven by my old house, slowing down to look at those woods. They've thinned out a bit as the town has grown, but they're still there. So is the pond. And every time I look at that tree line, I wonder if it's still out there, whatever it was, moving through the Georgia woods with those long, powerful strides. I don't have proof. I don't have photos or footprints or hair samples. All I have is what I saw with my own eyes on a summer evening in '96. But I know what I saw wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal native to Georgia that's known to science. And to this day, whenever I hear rustling in the woods or see a particularly dense forest, I get that same cold feeling up my spine, remembering how it felt to be seen and assessed by something that shouldn't exist. Meduti, Story 10. I've been a park ranger for nearly 14 years, and I've seen some weird stuff in my time. Wildlife acting strange, lost hikers with wild stories, even a few mountain lion encounters that made my hair stand on end. But what happened last month with my son Ethan has been keeping me up at night. I've gone back and forth about sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has seen something similar. It was a Tuesday in late November, just after Thanksgiving. Ethan had a few days off from college, and we decided to do a quick father-son camping trip in my section of the National Forest. The area's beautiful this time of year, fewer tourists, quieter, and you get that crisp air that just feels cleaner somehow. My wife Karen wasn't interested in the overnight part, but wanted to meet us for dinner, so we planned to pack up around 6 and meet her at a small restaurant off Forest Road 115. The day had been perfect. We hiked about 5 miles, caught a few small trout in the creek, and just had those good conversations that happen when there's no cell service and nowhere to be. As evening approached, we started breaking down our small campsite. The temperature was dropping fast, probably mid-30s by then, and that bluish evening light was starting to settle in the trees. I remember checking my watch. It was 5:58, and I was thinking we needed to hurry since it would take us about 40 minutes to hike back to the truck, then another 20 to drive to meet Karen. I was sitting in my camp chair, had just finished my coffee, when I stood up to start packing the cooking gear. That's when I saw it. To my left, maybe 70 yards away, there was a small clearing between the trees where I could see deeper into the forest. Something moved through that space, and my brain immediately registered that something was wrong with what I was seeing. It was a figure, moving on 2 legs, walking, but the size was wrong, all wrong. My first thought, and I know how this sounds, was that someone was playing a prank, wearing one of those ghillie suits that hunters and military folks use for camouflage. It had this brownish-green look that blended with the surroundings, but then my ranger brain kicked in with the obvious problem. Hunting season for this zone had ended the week before. The next season wouldn't open until spring. And this was way too big for a person in a suit. "Ethan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "look over there, through those trees. Do you see that?" Ethan was rolling up his sleeping bag but stopped and followed my gaze. I watched his face change as he spotted it. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. The figure was moving at a casual pace, not running, not looking around, just walking with purpose through the forest like it belonged there. The way it moved was what really got to me. Smooth, natural, not the stiff, awkward movement you'd expect from someone in a costume or carrying heavy gear. I could clearly see an arm swinging naturally at its side. "Dad, I can see its feet moving," Ethan said, his voice tight, "like independently, not like boots or a costume." He was right. The lower limbs were moving in a completely natural gait. This wasn't some guy on stilts or in a costume suit. This was something else. I've spent my adult life in these woods. I know what bears look like when they stand or walk on hind legs. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't have that shoulder structure, don't swing their front limbs like arms when walking upright, and don't maintain that posture for more than a few seconds usually. The other thing that struck me was that this figure wasn't carrying anything. No rifle, no pack, nothing in its hands. Everyone who comes out here carries something, water, gear, something. These aren't casual walking trails. You don't just stroll through these woods, empty-handed. We watched it move through that gap in the trees, and then it was gone, obscured by the forest again. The whole sighting lasted maybe 15 seconds, but it felt like time had slowed down. Ethan and I looked at each other, and I could see he was processing the same questions I was. "That was at least 8 feet tall," he said quietly. "Let's check," I replied. I asked Ethan to walk over and stand where the figure had been. He's 6 feet tall, solid build. As I watched him walk to the spot, I felt this weird hollowness in my stomach. The scale was all wrong. When Ethan stood where the figure had passed, I could immediately tell that its shoulders had been level with the top of my son's head. Whatever we saw stood at least 8 feet tall, possibly more. "Could it have been someone on someone else's shoulders?" Ethan asked. But even as he said it, we both knew that was impossible. The movement had been too fluid, too natural. We hadn't heard any vehicles all day. The nearest road that could be driven on was 3 miles back. The closest campsite besides ours was about 5 miles away, and according to the registry, it was empty. We were alone out there, or at least we were supposed to be. I've spent enough nights in the forest to develop a healthy respect for it. I don't scare easily. But standing there, with my son, realizing what we'd just seen, I felt exposed in a way I never had before, like we'd glimpsed something we weren't meant to see. "Let's pack up," I said, trying to sound calm. "Mom's waiting." We packed in record time, barely speaking. Every few seconds, I'd scan the tree line, half expecting to see that figure watching us. The forest had gone oddly quiet. That typical evening chorus of birds had stopped. Even the usual rustling of small animals in the underbrush was absent. As we shouldered our packs, Ethan said, "Should we try to follow it? Get a picture or something?" The ranger part of me, the part that documents unusual sightings and investigates anomalies, considered it for about half a second. But the father in me, and honestly some primal instinct I can't explain, immediately shut that idea down. "No," I said firmly. "We're leaving. Now." The hike back was tense. We moved faster than usual, barely talking except to point out obstacles or check our bearings. Every snapping twig or rustle in the underbrush made us freeze. Twice I thought I heard heavy footsteps paralleling our path, but when we stopped to listen, there was nothing. About halfway back to the truck, we came across something that still gives me chills thinking about it. There was a small clearing where the trail widened, and right in the middle was a perfect impression in the fallen leaves and soft earth. A footprint, but not like any human or animal print I've ever seen. It was huge, easily 18 inches long, and had 5 distinct toe impressions. The depth of the print suggested something extremely heavy had made it. Ethan saw it too, and just looked at me, eyes wide. I took out my phone to take a picture, but my hands were shaking so badly I had to try 3 times. When I finally got a clear shot, we hurried on. We made it back to the truck as the last light was fading. I've never been so glad to see that old Tacoma in my life. We threw our gear in the back and got in, locking the doors immediately. I started the engine, and we just sat there for a minute, the heater blasting, not speaking. Finally, Ethan said, "What was that, Dad?" I wish I had an answer for him. I've been a ranger for almost a decade and a half. I've studied the wildlife in these mountains extensively. Nothing in my training or experience could explain what we saw. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but we need to tell Mom we're running late." I tried calling Karen, but as expected, there was no service. As we drove down the forest road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. The drive to meet Karen took 22 minutes. I know because I watched every minute tick by on the dashboard clock, willing the truck to go faster on the winding forest roads. When we finally reached the restaurant, Karen was waiting in her car, looking annoyed until she saw our faces. One look at us, and her expression changed completely. "What happened?" she asked as we approached. I opened my mouth to tell her, but suddenly found I couldn't find the words. "How do you explain something you don't understand yourself?" Ethan just shook his head and said, "Something weird in the forest, Mom. Really weird." We went inside, ordered food neither of us could eat, and eventually told Karen what we'd seen. To her credit, she didn't dismiss it or laugh. She just listened, looking between us with growing concern. That night back home, I downloaded the photo of the footprint from my phone. It was clear enough, unmistakably not human, not bear, not elk, or any other large mammal native to our forest. I've kept it private for now, not sharing it with my colleagues. I know how it would sound. I've gone back to work since then, patrolling the same areas of the forest. Every day I find myself scanning the trees, looking for movement, for anything out of place. I've been back to our campsite twice during daylight hours, searching for more tracks or evidence. There's nothing. The footprint we found that night has been washed away by rain. Ethan's back at college now, but we talk about it sometimes. Neither of us has changed our story or our certainty about what we saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a costume. It was something else. I don't know what we encountered in the forest that evening. I don't have a name for it. But I know what I saw. And I know that the forest I've worked in for 14 years suddenly feels different to me now. Bigger, older, full of places where the shadows are deeper than they should be. And sometimes, when I'm alone on patrol and the forest goes quiet around me, I get the distinct feeling that I'm being watched. Story 11. I've been a hunter most of my life, following in my dad's footsteps since I was 12 years old. Living in rural Georgia, hunting isn't just a hobby, it's part of who we are. But something happened to me 5 years ago that I still can't explain, and I haven't told many people about it until now. It was late October, bow season was winding down, and I'd been sitting in my tree stand since about 3 in the afternoon. Nothing special about the day, typical Georgia fall weather, a bit chilly, but comfortable in my camo and light jacket. I was hunting a piece of private land about 20 minutes from my house, a place I'd been to dozens of times before. The owner, Mr. Daniels, was an old friend of my father's who let me hunt there whenever I wanted. The woods were the usual mix of hardwoods and pines, with a small creek running about 100 yards east of my stand. I'd seen a few does earlier, but nothing I wanted to take, so I was just enjoying being outdoors, watching the day fade. The sun was setting, and I figured I'd give it another 15 minutes before packing up. That's when everything changed. I climbed down from my stand just after sunset. There was still enough light to see, that grayish twilight where you can make out shapes, but details get fuzzy. I shouldered my backpack, grabbed my 12 gauge, I always carry it during bow season for protection, and started heading back toward my truck, which was parked about half a mile away on an old logging road. About 10 minutes into my walk, I stopped to take a leak against a tree. Nothing unusual about that, just a guy in the woods doing what guys do. But as I stood there, I suddenly realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The forest had gone completely silent. I don't mean it got quiet, I mean it went dead silent in a way I've never experienced before or since. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know they're never truly quiet. There's always something, wind in the trees, distant birds, insects buzzing, leaves rustling. But in that moment, there was absolutely nothing. Like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. No owls hooting as they started their night hunts, no distant coyotes yipping, no crickets, no frogs from the nearby creek. Nothing. The silence was so complete it felt physical, like pressure against my ears. I finished up quickly and zipped my pants, suddenly very aware of how exposed I felt. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was watching me. I didn't know what, but I felt it with absolute certainty. I gripped my shotgun tighter and continued walking, moving a bit faster now. The path back to my truck curved around a large deadfall, a pile of rotting leaves and branches where several trees had come down years ago. As I rounded this deadfall, I froze mid-step. Standing directly in my path, maybe 40 or 50 yards away, was something big. In the fading light, I couldn't make out all the details, but what I saw was enough. It was tall, way taller than any man, maybe 7 or 8 feet, standing on 2 legs. It had a massive, broad-shouldered frame covered in what looked like dark fur or hair. Its head was raised, and it seemed to be sniffing the air. Then it turned and looked directly at me. I can't fully explain what happened next. My first instinct should have been to raise my shotgun or run, but I did neither. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. Not the calm of being unafraid, I was definitely afraid, but a different kind of calm. Like meeting something ancient and natural, something that belonged in these woods more than I did. We locked eyes, or at least it felt like we did, for what seemed like minutes but was probably only seconds. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but my breathing had slowed. The creature didn't move aggressively, it just observed me. I had my shotgun in my hands, loaded with buckshot that could take down a deer or a boar, but the thought of raising it never even crossed my mind. Not because I was paralyzed with fear, but because it felt wrong, like pulling a gun on a person. Eventually, I took a small step backward, then another. Slow, deliberate movements. The creature watched me, then took several steps toward me. My heart nearly stopped, but instead of continuing in my direction, it suddenly changed course and moved into the woods on the opposite side of the deadfall. What struck me most was how it moved through the trees. Most large animals, deer, bears, crash through the underbrush. You can hear them coming and going. But this thing, it moved with purpose and grace, quietly, deliberately, like it didn't have a care in the world, like it knew these woods better than any living thing possibly could. And then it was gone, just like that. I stood there for a long time, unable to move, my legs trembling. When I finally managed to walk again, I moved faster than I ever have through those woods, constantly looking over my shoulder. The silence persisted for a while longer, and then, gradually, the normal sounds of the forest returned. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. Crickets started chirping again. It was like whatever bubble of silence had surrounded us had finally popped. I made it back to my truck in record time and sat there with the doors locked, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't get the key in the ignition for several minutes. When I finally drove home, I didn't tell anyone what happened, not my wife, not my hunting buddies. Who would believe me? The next day, I went back to see Mr. Daniels, the property owner. I casually asked if he'd ever experienced anything strange in those woods, or if there were any local stories about the area. He looked at me oddly, but said no, nothing unusual had ever happened. There, as far as he knew, just normal wildlife, deer, turkey, the occasional black bear. I nodded and changed the subject. I didn't want him thinking I was crazy or that I'd been drinking in his woods. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, feeling that same silence pressing in around me. I'd go to the window and look out at the trees behind our house, half expecting to see that figure standing there watching. I didn't go hunting again for the rest of that season, told everyone I was too busy with work. The following year, I forced myself to go back, not to the same spot, but to a different area, because I didn't want fear to take away something I loved. I've never told this story publicly before now. I've mentioned pieces of it to a couple of close friends over beers, but always downplayed it, making it sound like I just saw something I couldn't identify in the dark. But that doesn't capture what really happened. It wasn't just seeing something unusual. It was that silence, that complete, unnatural silence that descended on the forest. It was the way it moved, deliberate, yet graceful, like it belonged there in a way I never would. And it was that strange calm I felt, despite my fear, like standing in the presence of something. I don't even have the right word for it. Not divine exactly, but ancient. Something that existed long before humans started cutting down trees and building houses. I've read about similar encounters since then. Some people call these creatures Bigfoot or Sasquatch or other names. I don't know what label to put on what I saw. I just know it was real and it changed something in me. I still hunt those woods sometimes. Mr. Daniels passed away 2 years ago, but his son still lets me use the property. I've never experienced that silence again, never seen anything like what I saw that evening, but I'm always aware now, always listening for when the forest goes quiet. Sometimes when I'm in my stand watching the sunset, I wonder if it's out there somewhere watching me. And sometimes, right before I leave, I swear I can feel eyes on me again. Not threatening, just aware, present. I don't expect everyone to believe this story. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it myself, but I know what I saw, and I know what happened, and no one can convince me otherwise. That day changed how I see the woods, how I see my place in them. I'm not afraid to go back. If anything, I feel more connected to those forests now, but I go with a different kind of respect, a deeper understanding that we're not always at the top of the food chain, that some things in this world remain wild and unknown, even in places we think we understand, and sometimes, when the woods go quiet, it's best to pay attention. Story 12. I've been hesitant to share this for years. Most folks would just write me off as another crazy old-timer telling tall tales. But what happened to me back in November of '99 still gives me nightmares. I've been hunting since I was 12 years old. That's over 40 years in the woods. I've encountered just about everything out there. Bears, cougars, even a wolverine once up in northern Minnesota. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, has ever made me feel the way I felt that day near Packwood. My son Danny and I had been planning this trip for months. We had permission to hunt on a large stretch of private timberland east of Packwood, Washington. Beautiful country out there, mixed old growth and these thick patches of new growth firs that create perfect cover for deer. The weather that morning was cold as hell, probably in the low teens, but the sky was clear and the sun was shining, so it wasn't unbearable if you dressed right. We'd set up before dawn, me in a tree stand among some thick firs about 300 yards off this old abandoned logging road, and Danny was positioned down the road a ways where it curved around a small ridge. Good spots, both of them. We'd scouted the area the previous weekend and found plenty of sign. Deer tracks everywhere, some rubs on trees, and even what looked like a bedding area not far from my position. The first few hours were quiet, dead quiet actually. Thinking back on it now, that should have been my first clue something wasn't right. Usually in the woods, even in winter, you hear things. Birds, small animals rustling, the wind in the trees. But that morning, after the initial dawn chorus, everything just went silent. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Just figured the deer were moving and everything else was hunkering down. Around 10:30, I spotted movement through my binoculars. A nice buck, probably a 4-pointer, moving slowly through the underbrush about 80 yards out. Big bastard too. Would have made a hell of a trophy. I watched him for a while, waiting for a clean shot, but he kept weaving through the trees, never giving me a clear line. The buck eventually moved toward the logging road, crossing about 50 yards from where Danny was supposed to be. I radioed him real quick, keeping my voice low. "Danny, big buck heading your way. Just cross the road." There was a pause before his response came through, crackling slightly. "Dad, nothing crossed the road. I've been watching that stretch the whole time. That confused the hell out of me. I know what I saw. That buck definitely crossed that road where Danny should have had a clear view. I figured maybe he just missed it somehow. The kid's a good hunter, but everyone gets distracted sometimes. Well, keep your eyes open. He's heading southeast from the road." I decided to track the deer myself. I climbed down from my stand, shouldered my Remington, and started following the tracks in the snow. They were fresh and clear, no doubt about what I was seeing. The tracks led me about 200 yards from my stand toward a denser section of woods. And that's when things got weird. The snow just stopped. Not gradually like you'd expect, where it might get patchy under the trees. It was like someone had drawn a line. On one side, winter. On the other, something else entirely. The ground beyond that line was dark, almost black, covered with thick moss that had no business being there in November. The temperature felt different too, not exactly warmer, just wrong. I remember checking my watch, 11:15, and looking up at the sky. The sun was still shining brightly overhead, but in this section of woods, the canopy was so thick it felt like dusk. The light that did filter through had this greenish-yellow quality that made everything look sickly. I should have turned back right then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. But 40 years of hunting makes you stubborn, and I'd never seen a buck that size in these parts. So I kept going, following those tracks into that dark section of forest. The deer tracks continued, clearly visible in the moss, pressing it down and leaving distinct impressions. I followed them for about 100 yards until I reached a low creek bed with running water. The creek wasn't frozen despite the cold temperatures outside this weird pocket of forest. The water looked normal enough, clear and running over smooth stones. I stopped there to catch my breath and get my bearings, found a pile of downed timber by the creek and sat down, pulling out my pack of Marlboros. My hands were shaking slightly as I lit up, though I didn't understand why at the time. I was an experienced hunter in decent shape. A short hike shouldn't have affected me like that. I took maybe 2 drags off that cigarette when everything changed. It's hard to explain exactly what happened. Nothing visibly changed around me. The creek kept flowing, the trees didn't move, but suddenly I knew I wasn't alone. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a feeling, like when you're a kid and you know someone's hiding under your bed even though you can't see them. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. Then came the smell. Jesus Christ, that smell. I've field-dressed hundreds of animals. I've smelled decay and death and all manner of foul things in the woods. But this was different. It was like wet animal fur mixed with rotting meat. But there was something else, something musky and sour that I can't compare to anything else I've ever encountered. It wasn't just strong. It was overwhelming, like it was somehow getting inside my head through more than just my nose. The fear that hit me wasn't like normal fear. It wasn't like seeing a bear or nearly falling off a cliff. This was primal, all-consuming terror that bypassed all rational thought. My body reacted before my mind could even process what was happening. I secured my rifle, stamped out my cigarette, and started walking away as quickly as I could without running. The further I moved, the stronger the stench became, which made no goddamn sense. If I was walking away from whatever was causing it, the smell should have faded. Instead, it was like it was following me, getting more intense with each step. I remember thinking, it knows I know it's there. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary. Just that oppressive silence and that terrible smell. But I knew something was watching me, tracking me, following me. I knew it with a certainty I've never felt before or since. By the time I started climbing out of that creek bed, I was flat out running. My nerves were completely shot. My finger was on the trigger of my rifle, ready to fire at anything that moved. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears so loudly I thought it might burst. I don't remember much about that panicked flight through the woods. All I know is that I eventually burst out onto that logging road, nearly colliding with Danny, who was walking along looking for me. Jesus, Dad, what the hell happened to you? I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. I was drenched in sweat despite the freezing temperature, my face probably white as a sheet. I remember grabbing Danny's arm so hard he winced. "We're leaving, now." Danny started asking questions, but then he wrinkled his nose. "What's that smell?" so he could smell it too. It was fainter out here in the open air, but it was still there, clinging to me like smoke. Within seconds, though, it dissipated completely, carried away by the cold breeze that swept down the logging road. We hiked back to the truck in silence. I couldn't explain what had happened because I didn't understand it myself. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I had felt like prey. That evening, we met up with the rest of our hunting party at this small tavern in Packwood. After a couple of whiskeys, I finally told them what had happened. Most of them just exchanged looks, the kind that say, "Old Bob's finally lost it," without actually saying the words. Can't blame them, really. I would have thought the same thing. But then this older guy from the bar, hadn't noticed him before, approached our table. He must have been in his 70s, weathered face, the kind of deep wrinkles you only get from decades outdoors. He leaned in close to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know where you were. I'll never go back there." Before I could ask him what he meant, he walked away, paid his tab, and left the tavern. Never even got his name. We stayed 3 more days on that hunting trip, but I never went back to that section of woods. Couldn't bring myself to do it. Danny and the others hunted different areas, brought down a couple of smaller bucks. I barely left the cabin, claiming I'd caught a stomach bug. It's been more than 20 years now, and I've never told the full story to anyone outside that hunting party. Over the years, I've heard whispers from other hunters about strange experiences in that same patch of timber, just enough to confirm I wasn't imagining things. Some talk about missing time, others about feeling watched. A few mention the smell. Most people around Packwood don't like talking about it. I've thought about going back, just to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. But even now, 2 decades later, my hands start shaking at the thought. Whatever was in those woods that day wasn't a bear or a cougar or any animal I've ever encountered. I never saw it, never heard it, but I know it was there. Something was hunting me that day, something that didn't belong in this world as I understand it. I still hunt, still spend plenty of time in the wilderness, but I've never again felt that absolute certainty of being stalked by something I couldn't see, and I hope to God I never do. Story 13. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my close circle because it sounds completely insane, but I swear every word of this is true, and I still get chills thinking about what happened that night in September last year. My buddy Jake and I had been planning this camping trip for weeks. We're both pretty experienced outdoorsmen, having grown up in Oregon and spent most of our lives hiking and camping around the state. But this time, we wanted something different, somewhere more remote, away from the usual campgrounds packed with tourists and families in their giant RVs. Jake had been obsessing over these Bigfoot documentaries for months. I always gave him shit for it. Typical conspiracy theory nonsense, I thought. I'm the pragmatic one between us. An engineer who needs evidence before believing anything. Jake's the opposite, always chasing the next mystery or paranormal thing. But he's my best friend since high school, so I tolerate his weird phases. On September 10th, 2022, we loaded up my Jeep Cherokee with our gear and headed toward Mount Hood. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold, clear skies. We had a topographical map, and Jake had researched some old service roads that forest rangers used to use but weren't maintained anymore. Our plan was to follow one of these roads as far as we could, then hike in a bit further to truly get away from everything. Around 4 in the afternoon, we turned onto this narrow dirt road that didn't even show up on Google Maps. It was overgrown in places, with branches scraping against the sides of my Jeep. I remember thinking that if we got a flat tire out here, we'd be screwed. About 40 minutes down this road, Jake suddenly yelled for me to stop. He was pointing at something through the trees. "Dude, look at that! Those trees are arranged in an X pattern. That's not natural." I pulled over and looked where he was pointing. Sure enough, There were several fallen trees that appeared to be deliberately crossed over each other, forming this weird structure. One tree was balanced on another in a way that seemed almost impossible without human intervention. "That's a Bigfoot structure, man!" Jake was practically bouncing in his seat. "They do this to mark territory." I rolled my eyes. Or maybe some hikers got bored and made it. Or it's just a weird coincidence how the trees fell. But I have to admit, it was strange. The trees were massive, not something a couple of hikers could easily move around. And there was something deliberate about the arrangement that made the hair on my arms stand up. We continued driving for another 20 minutes before finding a decent clearing about 100 yards from a small stream. Perfect spot to camp. We set up our tent, built a fire pit, and got everything organized. By 6:30, we had a nice fire going and were cooking some steaks on our portable grill. The sun was starting to set, and the forest was getting that golden glow that photographers love. We were drinking beers, joking around, feeling good about our perfect middle-of-nowhere campsite. I remember checking my phone, no service of course, and seeing it was about 7:30 when I heard it. A single, loud knock sound echoed through the forest from the direction we'd driven in. It sounded exactly like someone had taken a baseball bat and struck a tree trunk with tremendous force. Just one knock, then silence. Jake immediately stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Probably a branch falling or something." "That was a tree knock, Marcus. They do that to communicate." I laughed it off, but honestly I couldn't explain what made that sound. It was too deliberate, too isolated. Just one loud knock, nothing before or after, not the sound of a tree falling or branches breaking in the wind. As the sun disappeared completely around 8:30, the forest changed. If you've ever been in deep woods at night, you know what I mean. Everything takes on this different quality. Sounds travel differently. Shadows seem deeper. Your imagination works over time. By 9:20, we were sitting by the fire, talking about heading to bed soon, when we both heard rustling about 15 meters away, just above where our campfire light reached. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. That's when I saw them. Two glowing eyes reflecting the light back at us. At first, I thought it was a deer, but something was off. The eyes were too large and too high off the ground for a deer. They were easily 7 or 8 feet up. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered. Jake was frozen beside me. "That's not a deer, man." I grabbed a rock and threw it in the general direction of the eyes, not directly at them, just nearby, hoping to scare whatever it was away. The eyes visibly moved, shifting positions and then disappearing behind a tree. Whatever it was intelligent enough to hide when it realized we'd spotted it. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was probably just an unusually large elk or maybe even a black bear standing on its hind legs. But deep down, I knew bears don't move like that. Jake was freaking out, whispering that we needed to leave immediately. I was trying to stay calm, telling him it was probably nothing, when at 9:35 he suddenly jumped up. There, I see it." He was pointing toward an old horse trail about 30 yards east of our camp. I couldn't see anything at first, but Jake was describing it in real time. "It's fucking huge, black, moving on 2 legs. It's crossing the trail. Red eyes, Marcus. It has red eyes." I still couldn't see what he was seeing, which was almost worse than seeing it myself. Jake's terror was real. I've known him for 15 years, and I've never seen him like this. His face was white, his hands shaking. To calm him down, and myself, I built the fire higher and moved my Jeep closer to our tent, turning on the headlights to illuminate the tree line. The forest beyond the headlights looked even darker and more forbidding by contrast. "It's right there," Jake whispered, pointing to a large Douglas fir about 20 meters from camp. "It's hiding behind that tree. I can see part of its arm." I stared at the tree but couldn't make out anything except shadows. But there was this feeling, this awful primal feeling of being watched by something intelligent, something predatory, The air felt heavy, electric almost, like right before a massive thunderstorm. At 9:45 we heard it, a scream from down the ridge, maybe a quarter mile away. It started high-pitched, almost like a woman screaming, but then it changed, dropping into this deep, guttural sound that made my stomach turn. And then it just stopped, cut off mid-scream. The forest went completely silent after that. No birds, no insects, nothing. That was it for both of us. Without saying a word, we started breaking down camp, throwing stuff haphazardly into bags. Jake was muttering fuck, fuck, fuck under his breath the entire time. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the tent lines. By 9:50, we were frantically throwing everything into the Jeep. Jake suddenly realized his phone wasn't in his pocket. We'd been using the flashlight apps on our phones for extra light, and he'd set his down somewhere. "I'll check by the fire pit," I said, grabbing my flashlight. Jake was already in the Jeep, engine running, begging me to hurry. I jogged over to where we'd been sitting earlier, scanning the ground with my flashlight. That's when some instinct, some deep animal part of my brain, made me look up. About 25 meters away, sitting atop a tree that had partially fallen against another tree, was something enormous. The creature was at least 10 or 11 feet tall, with black or reddish-brown hair covering most of its body except for its upper chest and face. Its eyes were closed, thank God, but its face had these deep wrinkles, almost like an old man's face, but not human, not even close to human. Its arms were massive. The biceps looked like someone had glued footballs to them. It was just sitting there, watching, waiting. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. Time stopped. Then its eyes opened. They reflected red in my flashlight beam. Not the normal eye shine you see in animals. Something different, something wrong. I don't remember running back to the Jeep. I don't remember finding Jake's phone in the front seat where he'd left it. I just remember Jake's face when I jumped in. He knew I'd seen something. I couldn't even speak, just pointed and shouted, "Go, go, go!" We tore down that service road as fast as my Jeep could go, branches scraping the sides, rocks hitting the undercarriage. I didn't care if I destroyed my vehicle, I just needed to get away. About halfway down the road, we heard 3 more of those knocking sounds coming from different directions around us. Jake was convinced there had been at least 4 of these creatures surrounding our camp. Herding us, maybe. Playing with us. I haven't been back to Mount Hood since that night. Haven't been camping anywhere, honestly. Jake moved to California 2 months later, said he couldn't handle being near those forests anymore. I still have nightmares about those eyes, about that face, about what might have happened if we'd fallen asleep in that tent. The worst part is not knowing, not having an explanation. Science says these creatures don't exist, but science hasn't seen what I saw that night. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder, are they still out there? And how many people have gone missing in those forests over the years? Whatever was watching us that night wasn't human, wasn't an animal I could recognize. And it was intelligent. That's what haunts me the most. The intelligence I felt behind those eyes, the deliberate way they surrounded us, the feeling that they could have taken us at any time, but were just curious, watching, waiting. I don't know what they were. I don't want to know anymore. Story 14. I've never told this story outside my immediate family and the few friends who experienced it with me. I'm almost 30 now, but the memories of what happened when I was 7 are as clear as if it happened yesterday. Some nights I still wake up sweating, thinking I hear that strange oohing sound outside my window. We moved to Greymouth on New Zealand's South Island when I was 7 and my sister Lily was 5. Dad got a job at the local hospital and Mum wanted to be closer to her parents. Our new house was in a small subdivision built on the hills overlooking the town, with the back of our property bordering a thick wall of native bush. The rainforest there is dense, all tangled vines, towering ferns, and trees that have stood for hundreds of years. The subdivision was new, with only about 15 houses scattered along a winding road. Most had big sections that backed onto the forest, like ours did. We were excited about the move. Having grown up in a crowded Auckland suburb, the idea of living next to a proper forest seemed like an adventure. We arrived in early February, just before school started. Mum encouraged us to explore and make friends with the neighborhood kids. That's how we met Chloe, who lived next door and was the same age as me. She introduced us to Emma, Zoe, and Hannah, who all lived within a few houses of us. About a 5-minute walk from our houses was this strange little area of dense bush that stood separate from the main forest. It was like a small island of wilderness, maybe half an acre in size, surrounded by cleared land. An elderly couple owned it, but never developed it. Mr. Wilson, the old man, told us we could play there as long as we were respectful. But if you ever hear thumping or yelling, he warned us, his face serious, you leave straight away. We nodded, thinking he was just being a grumpy old man. That island became our favorite place to play. We'd spend hours there after school, building little shelters from fallen branches, playing hide and seek, and making up stories about fairies and magic. There was a small clearing in the center where we'd sit and share secrets. A narrow dirt path wound through it, connecting to the main forest behind our houses. Everything was normal for the first month. Then one hot afternoon in early March, everything changed. It was just me, Lily, and Chloe that day. We were playing chase, running around and screaming with laughter like kids do. Lily tripped over a root, and I crashed into her, and we both fell in a heap, giggling uncontrollably. That's when we heard it. A strange, loud oohing sound came from the thick bushes at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't like any animal noise I'd ever heard before. It started low, then got louder and more intense, ending with this deep, menacing grunt. The sound echoed around us and we all froze. "What was that?" Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. "Probably just a bird," I said, trying to sound brave for my little sister, who was clutching my arm so tight it hurt. We decided to head home. As we walked back along the path, Lily suddenly stopped and turned around. The color drained from her face. "What's wrong?" I asked, following her gaze. That's when I saw it too. Standing partially hidden behind a large fern was something. It was dark and tall, taller than my dad, who's 6 feet. I couldn't make out details, just a dark silhouette watching us. When it realized we'd spotted it, it moved back into the dense foliage with surprising speed for something so big. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Chloe and Lily both nodded, too scared to speak. When we got home, Lily told Mum she'd seen a monkey face with big dark eyes and a big mouth that was covered in hair. Mum laughed it off, telling us it was probably just a possum or someone's dog. But I knew better. Whatever we saw was standing upright, and it was big. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. We still went to our play area, but now we were always on edge, always listening. Sometimes we'd hear footsteps following us on the path, but when we turned around, nothing would be there. Other times, we'd hear growling noises coming from the bushes. Then came the pebbles. We'd be sitting in our clearing, and small stones would hit the ground around us, thrown from different directions. Once, one hit Emma on the back, leaving a small bruise. One afternoon, Hannah screamed when she saw massive hairy arms reaching out from the bushes as she walked past. She said it tried to grab her, but she ran. We believed her because the same thing happened to Lily 2 days later. She came home hysterical, saying, "The monkey tried to catch me." We started going to the clearing in larger groups, thinking we'd be safer that way. That's when Zoe saw it clearest. She described seeing hands, then shoulders, then a hairy face with a large mouth peering at her from behind a tree. The most disturbing thing came from Chloe, though. She told us in a whisper one day that it would appear at her bedroom window at night. Her room was on the 2nd floor with a steep drop below the window. "It bends down to look in," she said, her voice trembling. One arm is stretched up like it's holding onto the roof. Sometimes it fogs up the glass with its breath. We nicknamed it Mr. Monkey Man, or sometimes just George. We tried to laugh about it to make ourselves feel braver, but the fear was real. The thing seemed to follow us between the clearing and our homes. It mimicked bird calls to signal where it was, but it was terrible at it. The calls were slightly off, like someone trying to whistle a tune they'd only heard once. After about 6 weeks of this, it became more aggressive. We were playing soccer in the clearing when our ball rolled into the bushes. Before anyone could go get it, the ball came flying back out with such force that it hit Zoe in the leg, leaving a red mark. That's when I got angry. Fear turned to frustration. This thing was terrorizing us in our special place. "Leave us alone!" I shouted at the bushes where the ball had come from. "This is our place!" I walked toward the bushes, ignoring my friends calling me to come back. I got close enough that I could make out a shoulder and what looked like a head before it started moving. The bushes shook violently, and then it started growling. A deep rumbling sound that made my stomach clench. Then it started screaming. Not like a human scream, but not like any animal I'd ever heard either. It was high-pitched and seemed to cut right through me. We all ran. I grabbed Lily's hand and we sprinted all the way home, not stopping until we were inside with the doors locked. That night, I couldn't sleep. My bedroom was on the second floor, like Chloe's, with a window overlooking the backyard and the forest beyond. Around 11 o'clock, I heard a scratching sound outside. I tried to ignore it, pulling my blanket over my head. But then there was a soft thump against the glass. I was frozen with fear, but knew I had to look. Slowly, I pulled back my curtain. There it was. A face was peering in at me, partially illuminated by the dim security light from our yard. It had thick hair all around its head and face, silhouetted against the light. It had bent down to look directly in, and its mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear anything. The glass fogged slightly with each breath. I screamed louder than I'd ever screamed in my life. The face disappeared instantly. By the time my parents rushed in, there was nothing to see. Dad went outside with a flashlight but found nothing. They thought I'd had a nightmare. The next day, I told the other girls what happened. Chloe started crying because she'd seen it at her window again too. We agreed to tell our parents everything. My parents were concerned enough to call the police, thinking it might be some creep targeting children. The officer who came was nice, but skeptical. He said there had been reports of escaped monkeys in New Zealand before, but none in our area. He suggested it might be a large possum, or even a person playing pranks. Mum and Dad didn't let us play in the clearing anymore. In fact, none of our parents would let any of us go there. Mr. Wilson put up a fence around the area after Dad talked to him. About 2 weeks after I saw it at my window, there was a commotion in the neighborhood. Mr. Peterson, who lived 3 houses down, had been taking out his trash late at night when he saw something large and dark run from behind his shed into the forest. He described it as moving on all fours, but not like a dog, more like a person doing a bear crawl, but fast. A week later, the Jenkins family moved out suddenly. Mrs. Jenkins wouldn't say why, but her daughter Katie told Emma it was because her dad had seen the monkey man staring at him through their living room window one night. By the end of that month, 3 more families had moved away. The housing development company brought in some men to clear more of the forest edge, pushing it back another 30 meters from the houses. They found nothing unusual, just typical New Zealand bush. We lived there for 2 more years before Dad got transferred to a hospital in Christchurch. In that time, I never saw the creature clearly again, though sometimes at night, I'd hear that distinctive poor bird call imitation from the forest. Lily and I would look at each other, knowing what it was. The strange thing is, after we moved, I tried researching New Zealand cryptids or folklore about monkey-like creatures in the bush. There's nothing that matches what we saw. The closest might be stories of the Meroero, wild, hairy humans from Maori legends, But those descriptions aren't quite right either. What haunts me most isn't just what we saw, but the intelligence behind it. The way it threw the ball back, the way it mimicked bird calls, the way it targeted children specifically. It knew what it was doing. And the fact that it could climb up to second-story windows means it was incredibly strong and agile. I've been back to Greymouth a few times to visit old school friends. That housing development never fully took off. Many of the houses stand empty now, and the forest has started to reclaim parts of the cleared land. No one plays in that clearing anymore. In fact, most locals avoid it entirely. I've never been able to explain what happened during those months when I was 7. I've tried telling myself it was just our imaginations running wild, or maybe some local playing a sick joke. But then I remember the breath fogging up my window, the dark eyes staring in at me, and I know, whatever it was real. And sometimes I wonder if it's still there, watching and waiting in the dense Greymouth bush. Story 15. I've been holding this story inside for over 50 years now. I'm an old woman these days, but what happened that summer night in 1967 still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I was 16 at the time, just a normal teenager in Ashland, Ohio. Nothing special about me, nothing special about our town. Just a quiet place where nothing much happened until that night. It was the middle of July, hot and sticky the way Ohio summers get. My parents had let me spend the night at my best friend Jenny's house. We were both on summer break, and her parents were cool with us staying up late watching TV and eating junk food. It was a Friday night, and we were just being normal teenage girls, talking about boys at school and complaining about how boring our summer jobs were. Jenny's house was nicer than mine. Her dad worked at the factory in management, while my dad was just on the line. They had central air conditioning, which was why I loved staying over in the summer. My house was always sweltering. It must have been around 11:30 when it happened. We were sitting in Jenny's living room, the TV on low so we wouldn't wake her parents. I remember we were eating potato chips and drinking Cokes, laughing about something stupid. Then all of a sudden, every dog in the neighborhood started going crazy. And I mean crazy. Not just regular barking like when the mailman comes. This was frantic, panicked barking, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up. It wasn't just 1 or 2 dogs either. It sounded like every single dog for blocks around was losing their minds at the exact same time. Jenny and I looked at each other. "What the heck is that about?" she whispered. The barking got louder, and it seemed to be moving, like whatever was causing it was on the move too. We could hear it getting closer to Jenny's house. Her dog, a German shepherd named Rex, was outside in their fenced backyard, and he was going absolutely berserk. I'd never heard him sound like that before. He was a well-trained dog, but now he sounded terrified. Jenny got up and went to the front window, pulling back the curtain to look outside. I followed her. The street was lit by those yellow-orange streetlights they had back then, casting everything in this weird glow. At first, we didn't see anything. "Should we wake up your parents?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jenny shook her head. "My dad will be mad if we wake him up for nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Something was coming. The barking was getting even louder now, and we could hear dogs running, their claws clicking on the pavement. Jenny's hand was gripping the curtains so tight her knuckles were white. "I'm going to look outside," she said. And before I could stop her, she was unlocking the front door. "Jenny, don't," I started to say, but she had already cracked the door open. We both peered out into the night. At first, all I could see was the empty street, lit by those eerie streetlights. Then movement caught my eye from the left. Something was coming down the street. Fast. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. It was big, like a very large man, but not quite right. It was running, but not like a person runs. It was covering ground so quickly, but in a way that seemed wrong somehow. Behind it, a pack of neighborhood dogs was following, barking frantically, but keeping their distance, like they were afraid to get too close. As this thing passed under the streetlight about 4 houses down, I got a better look at it, but not a clear one because it was moving so fast. It was dark all over, not like it was wearing dark clothes, but like its whole body was this deep dark color. I couldn't make out any clothing at all. It seemed, I don't know, solid, like one piece. But the worst part was when it made that sound. God, I can still hear it in my nightmares sometimes. It was this horrible scream roar that didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before or since. Not human, not animal, something else entirely. It was so loud it seemed to vibrate in my chest, and I swear I felt it more than heard it. It was like pain and rage and hunger all mixed together. Jenny slammed the door shut and locked it, her face white as a sheet. We both backed away from the door, not saying anything for a long moment. The dogs were still barking, but the sound was moving away now, following that thing as it ran down the street. "What the hell was that?" Jenny finally whispered, her voice shaking. I just shook my head. I didn't have an answer. We spent the rest of the night huddled together on her couch, too scared to go upstairs to her bedroom, too scared to look outside again. We left the TV on, but turned the volume up to drown out any sounds from outside. Neither of us slept a wink. When morning finally came, Jenny's parents came downstairs and found us still awake, still on the couch. They asked why we looked so tired, and Jenny told them about the dogs barking, but not about what we'd seen. I don't think either of us knew how to explain it, and we were afraid they wouldn't believe us anyway. After breakfast, Jenny's mum drove me home. I was exhausted and just wanted to crawl into my own bed and try to convince myself that what I'd seen was just my imagination playing tricks on me in the dark. But as soon as I walked in the door, my mum grabbed me by the shoulders, her face serious. "Sophia, did you hear that awful screaming last night?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. My stomach dropped. "What? What screaming, Mom?" "Around midnight, the most horrible sound I've ever heard in my life. It woke me up out of a dead sleep. Your father slept through it, but Maria heard it too." Maria was my 11-year-old sister. She came into the room then, looking pale and tired, like she hadn't slept well either. "It sounded like someone was being murdered," Maria said quietly. "I was so scared." My mom nodded. "Our dog was terrified. He crawled under my bed and wouldn't come out for hours. He's still acting strange this morning. We had this big mutt named Charlie who wasn't afraid of anything. He'd chase off stray dogs twice his size and once even stood his ground against a neighbor's mean bull. The thought of him hiding under a bed made my skin crawl. Whatever it was, it ran right past our house," my mom continued, "headed toward the railroad tracks. There were dogs chasing it, barking like mad. I felt like I was going to throw up. It wasn't just me and Jenny. My mom and sister had heard it too, and it had come by our house after passing Jenny's. After my mom went to start lunch, I slipped outside. Our house backed onto a stretch of woods with railroad tracks running through them. The tracks extended for miles in both directions, connecting our town to others. Not many trains came through anymore, just a few freight trains a week. I walked around to the side of the house where my mom said the thing had passed. The ground was still damp from a rain we'd had the day before, and there in the mud were footprints. Big footprints, much larger than mine or my parents'. They weren't shoe prints either. They clearly showed heel and toe impressions, like whatever made them had been barefoot. They were deep too, like whatever made them was heavy. I followed the prints to where they disappeared into the grass near the edge of our property. They were heading toward the railroad tracks, just like my mom had said. Standing there looking at those tracks, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if this thing used the railroad tracks as a path? It would make sense. The tracks cut through the woods, but also ran right through town. If something wanted to move around without being seen much, following the tracks would be smart. They could provide cover in the wooded areas, but also a clear path to travel quickly. And what if it had been searching for food? The thought made me shiver despite the summer heat. I never told my parents what Jenny and I saw that night. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that they would believe me and be as scared as I was. But my mum and I talked about the scream sometimes. Other people in town had heard it too. For a few weeks, it was all anyone could talk about. There were theories, a mountain lion that had wandered far from its territory, a psychotic escaped from some institution, even aliens. That one came from the town drunk, so nobody took it seriously. Eventually, like most things, people stopped talking about it. Life went back to normal. But I never forgot. For years after that, I refused to go near those railroad tracks. When I finally moved away from Ashland after high school, it was partly because I couldn't stand living so close to those woods and tracks anymore. I always had this feeling that whatever I saw that night was still out there, using those tracks to move around, maybe even watching our house. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there now, all these years later, still running along those tracks at night, still making dogs go crazy with fear, still hunting for whatever it hunts. I don't know what it was. I've looked into cryptids and local legends over the years, but nothing quite matches what Jenny and I saw that night. The closest might be stories of the Ohio grassman or Bigfoot, but what we saw moved too fast, sounded too wrong. To this day, I can't hear a dog barking at night without freezing in place, listening carefully to see if it's regular barking or that panicked, terrified sound I heard that night. And I never, ever go for walks alone after dark. Whatever I saw that summer night in 1967 wasn't supposed to exist in our world, but it did. It does. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if someday it might find me again. Story 16. I've never been the type of person to believe in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I've always been pretty logical, maybe even skeptical to a fault. But what happened that night in 2002 completely changed how I look at the world, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was early October, around the 10th or 11th, I think. The leaves had started changing, and there was that crisp fall feeling in the air. My buddy Eric and I had been helping his uncle move some furniture out near Soda Springs, about an hour southeast of Montpelier, Idaho. We were driving back in his beat-up Chevy van, one of those old-school models from the 80s, with the sliding door and barely functional heater. It was late, probably around 10:30 at night. The country roads out there are pitch black. No streetlights, just endless darkness broken up by our headlights. We were on this two-lane road that cuts through a heavily wooded area before it opens up to farmland. We weren't drunk or high or anything. I need to make that clear. Eric was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and we were just talking about normal stuff. His girlfriend troubles, my new job at the hardware store, nothing exciting. The radio was playing quietly, some classic rock station that kept cutting in and out because of the mountains. I remember Eric was mid-sentence about something when he suddenly slammed on the brakes so hard I nearly hit the dashboard. The van's tires screeched, and we skidded maybe 15 or 20 feet before stopping. That's when I saw it. Right in front of our van, illuminated perfectly in our headlights, was something. It had been crossing the road from right to left, and when Eric hit the brakes, it turned and looked directly at us. I can still see its face with complete clarity. It wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. Growing up in Idaho, its head was smaller, more proportionate to its body, but definitely not human either. The eyes are what I remember most vividly. They were bloodshot, almost like it was sick or hadn't slept in days, with these dark pupils that looked disturbingly human. Those eyes locked with mine for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple of seconds. Its fur was long and matted, predominantly brown, but had these weird patches that looked almost blonde or sun-bleached. The fur hung off its body in these uneven clumps, like it had been caught in something or hadn't groomed itself in months. It was filthy looking, like an animal that had been rolling in mud and dirt. The way it moved was just wrong. It was upright on two legs, but bent forward at the waist in this unnatural posture. Not hunched like an old person, but bent forward like it wasn't completely comfortable walking upright. And it was tall. Its hip was level with my window as it passed by the van, which would put it at maybe 7 feet if it stood fully upright. I couldn't see its legs clearly because of the angle and the darkness, but whatever this thing was, it crossed that entire 2-lane road in like 4 or 5 strides. Its movements were fluid, but also urgent, like it was trying to get away from something. The weirdest part was the look on its face. It wasn't aggressive or threatening. It looked surprised, scared even, like it was just as shocked to see us as we were to see it. There was this moment of mutual recognition that I still can't explain. It felt like it understood exactly what we were, and that realization frightened it. As it disappeared into the trees on the other side of the road, I noticed headlights coming from the opposite direction. This other car, I think it was an older sedan, suddenly swerved and ended up in the ditch on their side of the road. They must have seen it too. I remember thinking we should stop and check if they were okay, but neither of us moved. We were completely frozen. Eric and I just sat there in silence for what felt like minutes. The heater was making this clicking noise, and the radio was still playing some Eagles song. I finally turned to him and said, "Did you see that?" His face was completely drained of color. He just nodded and whispered, "What the fuck was that?" He put the van in park, and we just sat there for a while, trying to process what we'd seen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't just fear. It was this overwhelming feeling of having witnessed something that shouldn't exist. After a few minutes, we noticed the car that had swerved was backing out of the ditch. Their headlights were still working, so they must not have hit anything too hard. They drove away quickly, and I don't blame them. Part of me wanted to chase after them, to confirm that they saw what we saw, but we didn't. Eric finally put the van back in drive, and we continued toward Montpellier. We were going maybe 30 miles per hour the whole way, both of us scanning the roadside constantly. Neither of us wanted to admit how terrified we were, but I kept checking the side mirrors, half expecting to see that thing chasing after us. When we finally made it back to town, Eric pulled into a gas station even though we had plenty of fuel. I think he just wanted to be around other people, under bright lights. We went inside and bought some coffee, trying to act normal while our minds were racing. The cashier must have thought we were on something because we were so jumpy and pale. We sat in the parking lot for almost an hour, just talking about what we saw. At first, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with mange, or some guy in a costume playing a prank. But those explanations fell apart as soon as we voiced them. A bear doesn't walk on 2 legs for that distance or move that way, and no costume I've ever seen has eyes that look like that. Alive, intelligent, and scared. The next few days were surreal. I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bloodshot eyes staring back at me. I kept replaying the encounter over and over, trying to find some detail that would explain what we'd seen. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that we had encountered something unexplainable. Eric and I told a few close friends, but we could tell they didn't believe us. They nodded and said things like, "That's crazy, man," with that tone that tells you they think you're either lying or hallucinating. After a while, we stopped bringing it up altogether. I didn't blame them for not believing us. I wouldn't have believed it either if someone had told me the same story. We never reported it officially. What would we even say? "Hello, police. We saw a Bigfoot-like creature on Highway 30. They'd think we were drunk or looking for attention. Besides, there was no evidence. The thing didn't leave footprints that we could see, and we didn't have cameras or phones with cameras back then, at least not ones that would work in the dark. For weeks afterward, I was afraid to drive that stretch of road at night. I would take longer routes just to avoid it. Even now, 21 years later, I get this tight feeling in my chest whenever I pass that spot. I've gone back in daylight a few times over the years, hoping to find something. Hair caught on a branch, unusual tracks, anything that would validate what we saw. But there's never been anything. Eric and I don't talk about it much anymore. He moved to Oregon about 5 years after it happened, and whenever we catch up, we might reference it obliquely, but never directly discuss it. It's like this unspoken agreement we have. We know what we saw, but we've accepted that no one else will ever believe us. So what's the point in trying to convince them? I've researched similar sightings in the area and found a few reports that describe something similar. Upright, fur-covered creatures that don't quite match known wildlife, but nothing that perfectly matches what we saw that night. I've read about Bigfoot and Sasquatch encounters, but even those don't quite fit. The creature we saw wasn't as massive or ape-like as those descriptions. It was something different. Over time, I've developed this theory that maybe there are species out there that have evolved to stay hidden from humans. Maybe they're intelligent enough to avoid detection, only occasionally being spotted by accident. That would explain why there's never any conclusive evidence. They don't want to be found. Sometimes I wonder about that other driver, the one who swerved into the ditch. Do they tell this same story? Do people believe them? Or have they also learned to keep quiet about something they can't explain? The older I get, the more I realize how little we actually know about the world around us. We think we've catalogued every species, mapped every inch of wilderness, but then something like this happens, and you realize how arrogant that assumption is. I know what I saw that night wasn't a bear or a moose or any other animal native to Idaho. It wasn't a person in a costume or a hallucination. It was something real, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but does. I don't expect anyone reading this to believe me. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, but I needed to put this out there, if only to get it off my chest after all these years. Those eyes still haunt me. Not because they were monstrous or evil, but because they were so aware. Whatever that creature was, it knew exactly what we were. And I think that's what scares me the most to this day.